As Ben sat in the living room late at night, staring at his jacket with intense eyes, Myriad spoke up in his head. "Oh yeah? Oh sweet, sounds good to me. Why? I'm already filthy rich, so I don't need the money, and while I am doing the best I can for every single piece I create, I've been having to go fast to get it all out too. This means I'll be able to focus more on quality than quantity for a bit. I've been doing all this for the sake of the planet, but there's definitely a ton I'd rather be focusing on instead. I'm up because I have a question on my mind, buddy. Let's talk the ship of Theseus." "I do, and that's not what I'm on about. It's a matter of philosophy from my old world that goes something like this. Imagine you have a boat and you replace a plank on it. Is it still the same boat? Okay, well, first of all, screw you. Second, though, there's more to it, so just follow me for a bit. In that case, if you replace a second plank, is it still the same? Exactly, with a bit more from there as well. For example, what if you take all the discarded pieces and reassemble them into a boat again? Does it hold a greater claim to the title of being the original boat by virtue of being made from all of the original parts, or does the methods of repair and assembly change things? What do you think?" "Ah, my sweet Myriad. You've hit the nail on the head though. 'Cause you see, while there's really no straight answer on my old world, here there kind of is, at least in this case. Stuff on Earth may lack any sort of immeasurable qualia, but here we have your church filled with your essence. There's no way you guys up there couldn't tell me how much I could change it while leaving it in a form that would still qualify as your church, or how much I could take away in the process either. Along with the little minor detail of if the stuff I take away is going to have any interesting uses either." "Lame," Myriad went on, ignoring his apostle's complaints. "Unauthorized use. This story is on Amazon without permission from the author. Report any sightings." "No, of course not."
Local site.
Okay, so as you know, the advertised defensive properties of the coat suck. Which is fair enough, I guess, and it's not just you either. The enchantments I have on it are good, outrageously fantastic even, but once they go against an awakened skill holder with an ultra-rare weapon, I end up pretty hurt. And I agree completely, but seeing as how that seems to come up every now and then, I'd much rather be ready when I don't need to and worry about having over-prepared later. Now, as for the changes, I know I can remake the enchantments without issue, so it comes down to how much I can alter the physical code itself. I've patched it plenty before and it's been fine, but that's all been minor modifications in the grand scheme of things. Ideally, I want to replace the entire thing, but since the point is kind of to reap whatever benefits it gets from being a church, I can't do that, so that leaves me hoping I'd be able to replace either the outer leather or inner lining. Myriad was quiet for a moment, thinking it over before giving his answer. "Really? In that case, that's better than I'd hoped for, so this is perfect. In that case, let's get started." Paying no attention to how late it was, Ben went to the shop to start his newest project, laying his coat down as he envisioned exactly what he wanted to do. Since the inner lining was the part that he'd be able to replace, that was the bit that would be getting his main focus as he broke down the various enchantments covering the total of the thing before removing that bit, casting it to the side. While he'd reclaim the mithril it was made with later, he wanted something more complex for it compared to what had originally been there as he went through his already present materials, grabbing not only more mithril but also others that could be used to give power to enchantments. The rainbow mana crystal and more bujal that went into so much that he made for all of the other things he'd create thanks to the power they could provide, as well as a few other metals to make the end product strong but flexible. After taking all of the time he needed to, painstakingly constructing a mass of wire with the properties he desired, it was time for him to move on to the next part of the lining. Like with the original, it wasn't just going to be made of wire. It needed to be comfortable to wear after all, meaning he needed some threads to go with it, but he wanted a far higher quality than the stuff he'd already picked, with an option already available and waiting in his shop. He was still receiving wood from the Dryads in exchange for the potions and other goods he was sending out, and as one of the best enchanting materials on the planet, it made it the perfect choice to work with as he first used his magic to help separate the fibers before breaking them down just enough to make them softer and more flexible. Easier to work for his purposes as he further treated them until it reached the point they'd feel comfortable against his skin. It was only once that part was finished that he bound the wire to the threads and started enchanting up the individual strands before bringing them together, creating a newer, stronger lining that would have more power for the enchantments he was placing down. keeping the heating and cooling ones but adding to them so that the defensive enchantments wouldn't only be on the outside of the coat, creating a second layer of safety for him to work with as everything was strengthened to its maximum potential. It was only once that was done that he added the new lining to the original coat, but continued on from there. After all, just because he couldn't replace the leather didn't mean he couldn't enhance it, so with that goal in his mind he moved on to his next task, turning a small chunk of orichalcum into a fine powder and impregnating the leather with it to help increase its overall defensive properties, only to build upon them further with the outer layer of enchantments placed on top using everything Head learned since Head last modified them. It was with that he was finally done, the task having taken up the whole of his attention span as notifications filled his head. As exciting as those were to finally get though, they weren't near as much as Head felt given what his eyes were telling him. If anything, it just made the fact Head gotten those levels feel obvious as his limited analysis showed in an item in the middle rank of Legendary, telling him that Head yet again broken through another barrier. With his jacket finished and beyond his expectations, along with a couple new levels to go with it, Ben took some time to look at the rest of his equipment as well. Of the things he would regularly wear, he had all of his rings which there was no real way to improve on given that they were just there for the convenience of his enchanting and connect. Likewise were his 3 mithril bands that were ever wrapped around his arm to be enchanted on at all times, letting him practice and grow his enchanting in a manner that felt almost passive with how casual it was for him, even if anyone else would see enchantments forming and breaking constantly across all of them at all times. When it came to his more Busial and Deathstone bands, there wasn't much he could do to improve them either. Head periodically compare the amount of mana and life force that would be drained from him against his regeneration rates, but since both were largely just worn while he was asleep, neither were things to be improved. Which just leaves the bracelet Falk gave me and my barrier shoes for my more permanent bits of equipment, along with my knife and gun for when I'm going for a fight. I can't improve the first, but I can work on the shoes at least. I might end up needing them with everything to come, and then I think I'm happy with where the other 2 currently stand. Okay, just improving the barrier shoes it is, I guess. That at least was mostly a matter of remaking their enchantments, trying to make them stronger while at the same time activating faster so he wouldn't have another unfortunate moment where He'd be forced to watch it slowly going up as attacks were already getting past the barrier as it went up. Of course, there's only so much I can do about that, he thought with a sigh. As my mind gets faster then, there's only so much I can do to make the enchantment activation speed keep up. He'll just need to try and be mindful of that fact when activating them. Oh well, what's next? By that point Head decided he wasn't going to bother with sleep that night, so wanted to move on to another project, finding one waiting in the form of some ongoing work he was still struggling with. Among his many projects, he still had a body to make for Inox, with the Talos soul still contained back at home, and with a brand new level to both his crafting and enchanting it had officially become the perfect time to put them to the test. Okay, Harry's hoping this doesn't work too well, otherwise I may end up a little hurt. Don't worry. If I'm in danger then that's good news. It means that I'm on the right track. Not to worry, in a pinch I think I'll be able to handle myself, just gotta add the finishing touches. If you spot this narrative on Amazon, know that it has been stolen. Report the violation. Unlike in the past when Ben had focused on making miniature robot bodies to house the souls he would shove in them, he decided to move on to a full-size model at that point, wanting to see the effects of scaling it up, even if that meant getting a little more creative with construction. When it would get to the point that he was confident, then He'd make sure to construct the body properly for best results. But as he was still in the testing phase of things, he was leaning towards convenience instead, materializing different smaller sections of the body into modular segments that he could then snap into place as he brought the pieces together into a greater whole, finishing with the addition of a single soul crystal, housing the soul of one of the demons He'd killed during the discovery of just what the Forbidden Gods had done. It was the same demon soul he used any time he did his testing, meaning it was growing used to things at least. The form he gave it may not have matched its original body, but after being shoved into various bipedal shapes it understood the gist of it. Ben watched as it moved its arms and clenched and unclenched its hands before getting up and looking around, all while he looked back at it, taking it in through multiple angles with the eyes of his clones to examine its movements. Looks fluid enough. Smooth and natural, well, maybe a little jerky, but that's likely an aspect of it getting used to the new body as much as anything. Lower Legendary 2, which is a good sign, though how good remains to be seen. Inyx was mythic, and I know there's a big gap between each barrier. If I have to compromise at all in terms of quality, then it really can't be less than upper legendary, and I haven't even made it to there yet. Having my first middle legendary is good progress, but... His thoughts were cut off as his creation lunged at him, arms outstretched and ready to go for the kill, but far too slow. Even distracted, Ben was able to sidestep out of the way, dodging the sloppy attack, with himself feeling more disappointed than anything else as he held back a sigh. Yeah, if that's the best this thing can do, then it's absolutely not good enough. A wonder of robotics and enchanting, this would make an excellent substitute body for any random soul that needed one, but its combat potential is terrible. Just to confirm it, he let the robot attack for a bit longer, watching it struggle against its captor in a form that simply didn't have a level of power that someone with as many awakened skills as Ben could lose to. Every move was too obvious and weak, with it only stopping when he got close enough to rip out its soul crystal, letting the product fall to the ground below. Ugh, I can see a few places where I could immediately improve, but I think I'm about to start hitting some fundamental limits to both the materials at use and my knowledge here, he groaned. I guess knowledge is only kind of an issue. I learn more as I practice, and that gives me a chance to see what bits of robotics I've learned from the Gray are either applicable or adaptable to this universe. But when it comes to materials, he supposed that was another issue he'd have to work through with experimentation and practice, but his thoughts just kept drifting back to Inyx's original body. He may not have been sure what it was made of. Every single material that went into it felt almost biological in nature, but obviously weren't, given the fact that neither light nor life magic could be used on it. But as things were, it wasn't something he could replicate. Maybe being something he'd never be able to replicate. Without knowing exactly what it was something that only a god could create. Except not even a god, since none of the ones I know could tell me anything either. He sighed. So where does that even leave me? He needed better materials, and given that he wasn't prepared to revolutionize chemistry and material science to the point where it might almost be considered biology, where did that possibly leave him with where to go from there? Actually, don't I have Nair looking into an entire periodic table of new materials? Looks like it might be time to see how that's working out. Once that plan was made, Ben first used the beginning of the day to focus on his more regular tasks. Just because the gods were going to be reducing his load in the next couple days didn't mean he could slack on his orders, and he devoted as much effort as he ever would to getting each weapon produced to the best of his ability, informing the gods of his plans as he worked. It was only once he was done with his quotas that he went to find Thera and dragged her along, through the mini-gate to Analia and from there past the main gate network to Neri's main city, off to see the many magic materials that Ben had helped to bring into existence. And while I'm here, I suppose I should see those three, he muttered, not really wanting to visit Nadi, Zilly, and Zalith, but feeling a sense of responsibility. I can take an hour or two when we're done to judge their work and try to squeeze another level of connect out of them. Nair chimed in. What? It's been months, they need to chill. Alright, it's your grandkid, so if you're sure, just no regretting it later. The god had led the two of them through the streets to a large yet nondescript building, with an older woman already waiting outside, giving them both a smile and a bow before reaching out a hand for Ben to take. Welcome, Apostle of Myriad. I am Wrench, Neri's oracle. I've heard plenty about you. Nothing but good things, I'm sure. Ha, as far as Nair is concerned, which is all that matters. I'm very sorry about the reception Zalith gave you when you had the chance to meet him. I hope I can act as a better bit of company for your brief time here. Well, I have high expectations. Lead the way. When they were taken inside, what they passed were numerous busy halls, with what caught Ben's eyes the most being the many gray among them. Not any of the summoned, though, but instead projections from across the veil of reality, just like he was used to with his meetings with Quillith. Just as they drew his eyes, though, he drew theirs as well, with the many they passed turning to glance his way before continuing on to talk with their compatriots about their work and research. I guess it makes sense. I know they talk and help with more people than just me. I just wasn't expecting to see them here of all places. It didn't seem unusual for any of the workers, though, all of them acting as if that was the norm, so he didn't question it. After all, it seemed like the sort of thing that was sure to capture their curiosity as well, and who was to say what discoveries were going to come with it all as time went on. It was the sort of thing that deserves eyes from numerous worlds. Still, it was something he resolved to talk to Quillith about when their next meeting came around, to get some opinions from the Gray's perspective as they continued on through ending up at a shelf of written records as Wrench spoke up. I believe this is what you'd be interested in first and foremost, but afterwards I can guide you around to any particular materials of interest if you'd so desire. Sounds good. Give me just a couple of minutes. With those words, Ben held forth his hand, pulling books and notes from the shelf and letting the pages flutter through the air as he took them all in, reading months of research in a matter of moments as the Oracle watched on. Not used to the display the way Thera was, who simply waited for him to finish up as he processed everything. Interesting. Of everything there, the researchers were confident they knew about half of the effects present, with some of them seeming to be repeated across different materials while others were wholly unique. It seemed as though every affinity had its own version of mithril and mana crystal tied to its element, knocking away 2 of the 5 that each affinity would get, with other research having its discoveries and holes. The great air spirit appeared to have been thorough in looking after each of the more gaseous elements, discovering and recording all of their properties, both magical and mundane, even if they'd be difficult for Ben to personally make use of. But there were other things too. That reality's version of mercury seemed to be changed by the fire affinity, resulting in a substance that would neither heat up nor cool down regardless of the temperature around them, creating something that would act as a constant in a way that Ben was already imagining uses for, and a non-affinityed element that seemed to increase in density when exposed to mana without increasing mass. Really, there's a lot to go through here, and now that I know all of the material properties, at least it will be easier on my mana for whenever I want to materialize the non-affinityed ones. Plus, anytime I shove my brain into someone else's so they can materialize it too, which is really just going to be Thera and Jake. Oh, what the heck? Falk too. With his level of skill, I can get his help replenishing my Deathstone. This does leave a few questions though. So why haven't you guys named any of these? Ben asked as he flipped through one of the books, with everyone being listed with both the original element and the affinity that changed them but nothing else, while still having a clear spot for a real name. The question got him a smile though, with Wrench looking at him kindly. We were told that as the discoverer of all of this, you'd be receiving the naming rights. What, really? Really? We wouldn't be here if not for your work. It's best you be rewarded for it. It was unexpected, but he wasn't going to turn it down, especially when Wrench seemed to be eagerly anticipating whatever he'd choose. So he pulled out 20 books and quickly added new names to each cover. Earth Mithril, Earth Crystal, Fire Mithril, Fire Crystal, Death Mithril, Death Crystal. He went on till each of the 20 was done, much to the disappointment of not only the 2 with him but also the listening gods. Myriad sighed. What? It was Nair who answered, sounding underwhelmed. Accurate? Descriptive? Exactly what each one of these things is, and conveys as much without making anyone look it up later. Not named freaking Morabusial of all things? It's objectively not. This narrative has been unlawfully taken from Royal Road. If you see it on Amazon, please report it. Ugh, fine. It'll take some time to consider what to call the rest. Except the Mercury. That's getting called Temperate Mercury, and there's nothing you guys can do to stop me. There was resignation in the voices of the gods in his head, but he didn't really care. He honestly would have been fine if they had just wanted to call each one the element plus the affinity that had altered them. It would be descriptive enough to get the job done as far as he was concerned, but since it seemed he was alone in that assessment, he resolved to think of some more names for the few properly studied ones later as they instead moved to look around the facility, off to see the few examples that had caught Ben's eye in his reading, starting with one that seemed to have grown a new, secondary substance in the time since it had been created. Situated atop a small pedestal, covered by a glass case in a room with only a few others working, Ben eyed the mysterious substance he remembered creating with the aid of Jake. One of the space affinitied ones, the original metal had become a pitch black after being altered by the mana, with the new substance growing on it being a translucent white, with no explanation for what it was. It was obvious enough that the effect of the first was that it produced the second, but that didn't tell them more than that. And they already determined that the new substance couldn't be affected by earth magic, which means it's my time to give it a go. With his curiosity already raised to a new level, Ben walked over and revealed the material while others in the room watched before he used his unaffinitied power to rip away a piece, only for that act to make it instantly start dissolving. With the area, he pulled it from already growing back as one of the gray in the room spoke up. We do have a recent theory about that which hasn't yet made it into the books, though it will be hard to confirm. Alright, you've got my curiosity, what is it? If we're right, condensed spacetime. We've only just confirmed that space mages can pull it away too with the same end result, though we've been told the act feels unusual since they aren't used to having their power bend and shape solids like that. Interesting. And you've confirmed it's safe to touch? As much as we've been able to, yes. Hearing those words, Ben picked it up and began trying to enchant on it, feeling them all go down as he kept placing more, waiting for it to break under the magical weight in a way that never came. The material didn't collapse, instead just reaching a point where he couldn't apply more. Oh, now this is really interesting. I'm going to need to think on how I want to play with you, and also force Jake to make more when I get the chance. A little bead is not enough. Ben, don't talk to the materials like that when other people are around, Thera told him. You're going to make a weird impression. Okay, he'll save the sweet talk for when I'm alone with some later. In that case, to the next room. There was more to see after all and beyond the ones that had already been fully studied and understood. They had Ben's curiosity. As interesting as the new forms of mithril and mana crystal were, it had already been shown that they were better for enchantments of their own affinity while being worse for everything else. Meaning Ben would be sticking to the original stuff for his work unless anything significantly more specific came up. Even if this does answer one question I didn't care enough to ask. The star of the ghoul homeworld gives off death mana. It must be largely made of death mithril. Of course, how that happened is a different question entirely, but that is so not my problem. As they moved from room to room, Ben gave his 2 cents on the materials that were either only partially understood or not at all, mentioning tests he'd personally undertake or studies he'd want to indulge in order to get them done. Until one particular one caught his eye in a way he couldn't understand, holding his attention in a manner that made him wonder if he was being affected by it in some way. Has anyone mentioned a mind effect from this one? He asked the room, getting negatives all around. Maybe the difference in your mind is letting you feel some subtlety of it, Thera offered. Even if it usually helps you ignore these things, you do have more to feel it with than the average person. You're not wrong, but I'm not so sure that's it. I just can't put my finger on it. Which means it's time to put my finger on it. No negative effects seen from touching it, right? None, one of the researchers offered, which was good enough for Ben as he took away the covering and briefly placed his finger on it, instantly getting screams across his thoughts for the act. With the voices of 3 gods calling that out, Ben not only took his hand away but jumped back closer to Thera, ready to have her heal him given whatever was so bad as the rest of the room tensed up after that sudden and violent reaction, none of them having heard the gods the way he had. As the seconds ticked by though with seemingly nothing out of the ordinary, Ben looked up, wanting an explanation. What gives? Myriad sighed, already knowing his apostle was going to get far too much excitement from that. That statement alone made Ben's eyes light up as a flash of inspiration hit him, making him name it then and there. Faith Stone. Nair said, how much are we talking anyway? It's non-affinitied, I could totally make more. Myriad asked him. Fine, for now at least he'll hold off, although this is something that should be looked at a bit more. Okay, no need to rush me. I'm going. That fun discovery was enough to keep him motivated for the rest he was seeing after all, even with less fun discoveries to be made along the way until they came to the very end, not just the final material being studied, but the finally had been able to create. It was the non-affinitied one that had taken an overwhelming level of mana, along with being the one with the fewest research notes to be had, with none of them able to prompt any change in the substance no matter what they do. But that's interesting in and of itself. Feeling his attention captured yet again, Ben started asking questions, curious about their testing methods and observations that may have not made it into the notes as he picked their brains and tried to manipulate the material himself, ultimately coming to his own conclusion on the matter as he handled the small grain that had been produced. I think this might be the opposite of orichalcum, he mused, with Wrench asking the obvious question to that. What do you mean, the opposite? Orichalcum is impervious to all physical damage while being susceptible to magical. It would need some testing to see if I'm right, but at the very least it seems like it's not affected by magic in any way. Earth mages can't move or shape it, fire mages can't melt it, space mages can't warp it without tearing a hole in space to drop it through, and it doesn't seem like anything else is going to have a ton of effect either. Not even non-affinity magic seems to work, or at least the branch I use. So from there, The obvious thing to do is to see if it will melt in a normal fire if it's hot enough or if it will warp under enough force. God, if I'm right, then this could have all sorts of fun uses. This could revolutionize war. He didn't know what its limits would be. Would it be able to tear through magical barriers like they weren't even there? Be stuck inside victims without the aid of magic to help remove it from anybody it was inflicted on, creating a need for actual surgery in the world, and more from there? Ben could only imagine the horrors that could be committed if he was correct and the material saw widespread use, with the only benefit being that it couldn't. Abras couldn't manipulate it to any extent, and given the way the Great Earth Spirit had described things, that meant he likely wouldn't be able to create it either, and if that was the case, then making any vast quantity of the stuff would take more work than most would be able to pull off, especially when one considered the insane mana cost that would come with materializing it. Really, with all that one needed to know to make it, he was the only person currently on the world who could pull it off, and that was only after stealing an outrageous volume of mana to make it happen. But it's only going to get cheaper. Ben's magic was only going to improve, and his knowledge of that particular material was only going to grow. As he learned, it would only get easier for him to create something like that, leaving only the question of what he would use it for if he got to that point. Yep, don't worry about it. Why wouldn't I be? Well, as long as nobody pulls any crap, then you shouldn't expect any problems. I have already been paid after all. With the day to awaken what few mages had managed to get to the 8th levels of their magics finally there, he already knew he'd be helping just over 200 people, netting him close to 40 extra points of mana thanks to his agreement with the gods, which he intended to make good on, even if he found himself surprised to have so many more to do. Well, what can I say? I'm happy to inspire people to get me more mana. No, but it's a fair trade-off. Hell, it's not even a fair trade-off. I was crazy generous with this deal. I'm getting a point of mana for every 6 people I help. Meanwhile, they're awakening their magics with all of the other bonuses that come with it. Every god that thinks I'm not generous is a factually incorrect bastard, and you can quote me on that. Fine, it's not like there's a rush. Walking through his mini-gate to the main network and to all faith from there, Ben went to the same place he'd been the last time he'd done it, going to the Soul Mage Elvet's home on the surface and finding the expected faces already there. He knew the 2 Soul Mages would be around, same as the last time, and everyone else had come to expect, with Thera there too, practicing with Yuliel and Vasta at the side as she had been for months at that point, sparing him a smile while she worked on a spell as he greeted them all. Sup guys? Everyone ready for the end of the world? We're being positive about it, Ben. Amy sighed, with Jake sharing Ben's personal favorite strategy. I'm just not going to think about it till day of. This is officially the last month I can enjoy without stressing. Okay, that's the spirit. With a month until the invasion points opened, everyone was going to approach it in their own ways, and it was easy enough to see discomfort creeping back up in random faces on the streets, even if Ben felt like he was seeing far too much optimism too. Things had gone too well during the first wave after all. It had raised some people's faith for how things would continue to go to an unreasonable degree, something he didn't feel at all himself. Taken from Royal Road. This narrative should be reported if found on Amazon. Okay, Jake's right, not thinking about it. Alright then, in that case, don't mind if I borrow a few bodies before we start. He told them all as he shifted a bit closer to Yuliel and Vasta, making copies of both of their powerful and all-encompassing magics on new rings. While in general, he would typically prefer the specialized versions to claim for his use since they would be more powerful in general while he could make up for how focused they'd be. He wanted to be prepared for what was going to come, and having both options at the highest available level was going to do it for him. Especially since it looks like I'm not going to be finding anyone with some 5th and 6th level magics at their 2nd tier. God, I get awakened skills are supposed to be hard to level, but how can the world not have any? Myriad sighed in his head. Excuse you, I had to work my butt off to get to this point. Not a fan of hearing that little fact. Not one contender for a magic getting to the 3rd tier other than them? Okay, also not thinking about that. No more distracting me with bad news. I still have things to do. Not wanting to spare what his god had to say any more thought, Ben went over to Jake next, taking his friend's hand and giving him a bright smile. Hey buddy. Ben, my guy? You look a little scary right now, man. I just want to borrow your mind and soul for a couple minutes. That got a grimace as Jake understood where this was going. Man, shoving mana into me like that really hurts, you know? I can guarantee it hurts you less than it hurts me. Not only do I regulate the amount I give you, but you have a fundamentally higher capacity than I do. Anyway, I just want to make a certain magic material, and you're the only person I know with the right affinities for it. Please? Pretty please? He did his best to look his most innocent and hopeful, getting the response he wanted for his efforts. All right, if it's just the one. You're the best. Thera, mind if I borrow you for a minute? Sure, let's make it quick then. She came over and placed a hand on his back as he did the same to Jake, merging his mind into the others to create what he so badly wanted. While his prior visit to see all of the new magic materials had been for the purposes of making Onyx his body, Ben still needed to think on the ones he'd seen and how they might be incorporated into his future designs, as well as wait for more research to be done on the various unknown ones. But that didn't mean he didn't want to play with anything after all that, with the target of his attention being the material that seemed to condense the fabric of reality around it, as well as that condensate itself. It had proven to be a fantastic enchanting material, and while some of its other properties would limit its uses, he still very much intended to see what he could do with such a thing, with the only thing that meant being that he'd need more. A lot more. As Ben directed Jake to spend all of the mana being shoved into him, what came from that effort was a cubic foot of the substance, plenty for him to do his own tests and experiments to see its potential and limits later. For the time being, having gotten all that he wanted, he shoved it into his bag before thinking out loud. Let's see, if I'm supposed to be naming all of these things, then I guess this is getting called Voidstone. It condenses the void of space around it. That should be good enough, right? No one answered his musings, but he was happy enough with it, and with everything he wanted to do beforehand finally done, he moved on to chatting a bit with his friends before the door opened, letting in the first of those he'd be awakening. Ben! A young voice called out as a child ran in, jumping at him in her excitement while he caught her in surprise. Delaire? What are you doing here? It was a question he knew the answer to as soon as he asked it. His previous deal with Jagle still stood. He'd be awakening the Dryads who reached the 8th level of the magic without asking for any payment in return, and Hentath already knew he was the one doing the awakenings. Though it had caught him off guard at first, she'd obviously asked to come along with whoever in her village had made it to that tier. It was obvious there were going to be a few too. After all, the Dryads devoted their lives to improving their plant magic to protect their forests. But in all of that, he hadn't expected one of them to be the girl's mother, as a very tired Fontesh made her way to join them, albeit in a far slower manner. Fontesh, I wasn't expecting to see you here either. He could see that she had in fact made it to the 8th level, but when he'd seen her before the first wave, she'd only been at the 6th. While he personally didn't think getting 2 levels in a year should have been so surprising, it was constantly being made clear to him by the people in his life that he shouldn't be comparing his speed to others, with the Dryad giving an answer with a tired smile. I actually completed my last job shortly after you left the village, and the new one got me to my 7th level, and of course, once Delaire heard that you were the one awakening people, she made sure to pester me into doing everything I could to get the 8 for this. It's been some very long months. I wasn't pestering you. You were more concerned about my practice than I've ever been about yours. Ben laughed at that as he patted the younger girl's head. You didn't need to go so hard on your mom now, you know? You could have tagged along with someone else from your village. I'm assuming you're not the only one. Ah, there's 2 more, Fontesh told him. But they're both old enough that looking after her on the way out might have been a bit much on them. I'm not that young anymore. You're not that old either. Well, since you're here, let's get you awakened, Ben told her. Even if Delaire pushed you a bit, I'm sure it will feel worth it after. He prompted Fontesh to come closer, letting the 2 soul mages cast their spells to help her get even more out of the event before merging his mind into her own and placing a hand on her back, pouring mana into her as he guided her in the process of creating a seed. With the mana snapping into place only seconds later and the room exploding into light with her awakening, the process ending mere minutes after they entered. Are you really done already? Delaire asked with a pout, while her mother seemed more surprised. Grandmother did mention how quick it was, but I thought she was exaggerating, she muttered to herself before jerking with a start as she bowed her head to both him and the soul mages. Thank you all so much. I'll never forget this. Now come on, Delaire. Say your goodbyes so we can get out of their hair. Already. It was obvious she was in no hurry to leave, and Ben wasn't going to make her. If you two want, then you can stick around. It's really no bother. Really? Are you sure, Ben? Fontesh asked a lot more cautiously. I appreciate the offer, but this seems rather important. We really shouldn't distract you. Her daughter was making it clear she wasn't appreciative of her mother's consideration, but Ben just waved it off. Honestly, don't worry about it. This is so easy for me. I could make a legendary item at the same time while reading 1,000 books for fun on the side. At this point, I don't actually need my full attention span for anything. She didn't have the context to guess how much of that was true or an exaggeration, but if he was going to go so far, then she decided to accept his offer at face value. Unlawfully taken from Royal Road. This story should be reported if seen on Amazon. Alright, in that case, if you don't mind entertaining her for a bit, then we'd both appreciate it. And I think I might just take a seat and rest my eyes for a little then. He didn't know how hard she'd been working, but Ben could see she needed some rest. So without a word, he materialized both a blanket and a pillow for her, silently handing them over as she watched the display of power just as quietly, ultimately shaking her head and accepting them as she went to lay down at the side to have a nap. That left Dallaire beside him, staring at him in blatant excitement as she started talking, trying to get 100 words out at once about how her practice was going and ending up all over the place as she told him about the things she was making and how her enchanting and crafting and low plant magic were all progressing all at once as Ben did his best to encourage her, only getting her to pause as he got a word in. And that's all fantastic to hear, but wait, just 1 second and I'll see for myself and then you can tell me everything. Okay? Okay. With her a little calmer, Ben brought her into his mind from there, letting her actual body lean against him as she entered a dazed state while he mentally constructed an environment for her to work, both to let her show him how she'd been progressing and let her get some guidance from him as well as he watched her work in his mindscape, weaving just a single strand of his mind into hers to let her take advantage of his knowledge skill, while the part of him that was focusing on the physical world turned to the soul mages before the next person to awaken came in. Hey, is there any chance I could ask you to cast whatever spell you guys use to reduce leveling difficulty on her? She's still low enough in her skills that I can probably get her a couple while we're here with your help. She hadn't gained any level since he'd last seen her, but it sure seemed like she'd been doing her best, and he wanted to help her get some results for her effort, with Yuzu doing it immediately, even if it left her with a question. So who is this? She sure was excited to see you. Before he could answer though, explaining that she was a relative of Myriad's oracle whom he had promised to take as an apprentice one day, Thera spoke first, overcomplicating things by a long shot. Ben's daughter. He spoils her every time he sees her. Before he could correct that statement, Jake was already cheering, looking far too excited to hear that. Yes, I'm not such a bastard now, am I? Look at me. Not immediately knocking anyone up after getting here. You idiot. Look at her and then look at how long we've been here and do some basic math. Amy sighed. The girls, what? 12-ish? We've been here for 4.5 years. Thera's joking. We don't know that, Jake argued, wanting far too much to have a different human to point to the next time any of the others gave him flack for how he ended up with 2 partners. She'd only be half human. Who's to say she ages like a human? That was a good enough point that she didn't immediately have an argument and instead looked to Ben, letting him finally get a word in as the next person he was awakening chuckled at the side conversation. She's not my daughter. She's my friend's/coworker's relative who I told I'd be willing to take as an apprentice one day. Who you dote on any time she's around. Thera laughed. I do not. Aha. And how many strengthening potions have you sent her? Irrelevant. I send them to the whole village. Toys then? And books on every topic you'd ever want to teach her. A few, but we've been over this. I am at most showing brotherly affection. I'm not raising her. You kind of will be if she ever moves to Stonewall to train under you, you know that, right? I know nothing. The back and forth got some smiles, with Amy asking a question of her own, not thinking too much on it when she did. You had a brother back home, right? Did you dote on him this much? I wish I did. That statement killed the conversation in its tracks. But it was the truth. Ben really believed that he'd had an excellent relationship with his brother before he'd ended up in that reality. but now that he'd never see him again, he couldn't help but wish he'd done even more. Well, maybe the fact that I'm not going to see Mark again makes me want to spoil her a bit while I can. He admitted to himself. She was a good kid who seemed passionate about the same things he was. Given there was no way to know what the future might hold, how could he not want to support her where he could? It was nice getting to see her get some growth, with some of it happening in that very moment. Oh good. She just got a level of crafting, so I'm going to wake her up for some hands-on practice out here. And none of you say any weird things like that to her. Dryads don't even have fathers. I don't want any of you getting any weird ideas in her head. Hold on. It's been like 2 minutes, Amy said, surprised that the young girl had gained a level so soon when she seemed to be doing nothing, even with the help of the soul mage. 2 minutes for you, not her. Gods above, Ben. Please tell me she hasn't just been stuck in your head for days? Thera sighed, suddenly a lot more worried that he was going to traumatize the girl with his strange mind, even as he rushed to defend himself. It's been like 8 hours for her. It's fine. And with that done, that means it's time to move on to things I can't get her to replicate in my mind. That meant moving and manipulating her mana, quickly materializing a variety of things to work on, from a variety of household items so she could practice her enchanting to a few seeds to let her test out some of the plant magic spells he shoved into her head. He fully intended to make their time together as productive as possible, all while the stream of people to awaken kept making their way through. Unlike his last time awakening people, that time only took him a day as he breezed through the crowd, helping Delaire as he did, thanks to having 2 soul mages around to help lower her leveling difficulty. He was able to get her higher in both her enchanting and her plant magic as the hours wore on, aiding the process himself by merging just a single strand of his thoughts into her head to boost her thought speed by a bit while at the same time helping to replenish her mana as gently as he could, not overfilling her soul for any great purpose but instead just topping her up to let her work a bit longer without having to worry about her regeneration rates holding her back. The fact that it had all paid off was what he felt best about by the end, with the girl positively glowing about her success, right until that meant it was time to go. Come on, Delaire, her mother said, trying to pull her away and not having much luck as she hung on to Ben. We really can't keep bothering him. We can bother him a little bit longer. That got a sigh from Fontesh while Ben laughed, instead putting out a different offer. Unless you guys have anything to do, how would you feel about staying with Sakhel for a few days in Stonewall? I could train Delaire for a bit and we have a space mage coming for me in about a week. We could get you home then. Given how far the Dryad village was from their nearest gate, it wouldn't actually be that much difference in time if they went with them first and would be a lot more entertaining overall compared to traveling by cart for days. But Fontesh still seemed unsure. Are you sure that would be okay? I'm sure you have things to be doing and we really shouldn't be distracting you. Mom, he wouldn't offer if he wasn't sure. She's right. My workload has actually decreased recently too, so I have plenty of time to teach her a bit if you wouldn't mind, and I'm sure Sakhel would love to see you. Well, all right then, if you're willing then I won't turn you down. Delaire cheered at that as Ben continued to reassure Fontesh it would be fine, all while getting Myriad's attention in his head. Myriad. Tell your oracle that she and Raelia are going to be having guests for a few days. They're family and it's the end of the world. They should absolutely use this last bit of time to see each other. If she's unhappy about it, then I'll make it up to her later. Yeah, that's fair. If Sakhel was unhappy about it, then he'd just deal with it later, but for the time being that was a future problem. With the time they had left, Ben dragged the 2 along for a dinner with his friends before making them each an amulet to take them both through the gate network and then Minigate, arriving back in Stonewall. If you come across this story on Amazon, be aware that it has been stolen from Royal Road. Please report it. While letting the 2 enjoy the sights of a town very different from their own, they slowly made their way to drop them off with Sakhel for the night, with the Oracle seeming happy enough to get the chance to see some of her family again in the time they had left before the next wave until everyone turned in, letting Ben think about exactly how he wanted to do things as he laid down for the night. Since the gods had reduced his workload by such a fair amount, combined with the increase in clones he had to take advantage of, Ben had plenty of time to focus on other things and he'd been using that time to indulge his skills in a number of ways while also trying to create as many legendary items as he could. But putting 2 of his bodies on the task of training Dallaire wasn't going to be the biggest loss for his productivity. At worst it might slightly cut into his enchanting as he guided her more on that, but he was making good enough progress on his current job that it wasn't going to be much of a hit. He was simply too good of an enchanter at that point for whatever small distraction helping her would be to cause him to lose out that much, especially since he'd still be able to enchant on his various bracelets without distracting her from her practice. Which means I just need to think of a couple good exercises for smithing and alchemy for her, just to get her a taste of both. Let's see. Falk had me making J-hooks when I first started, so I'll get her to do a couple at first, but honestly that isn't the most exciting. Is it? Let's see. Why not have her make some woodworking tools that she'll be able to keep practicing with when she's back home, along with some basic healing potions? Yeah, that sounds like a plan. With that strategy fully in place, Ben went up to Myriad's realm for the night, ready to spend the time he had bothering some gods. "Hello, everyone," he greeted cheerfully. "Another job well done. Aren't I just the best?" Yes, good work as always," Myriad told him. "Not exactly unexpected, though. You did fine last time. Why wouldn't you do just as well after your skills had improved?" "Maybe so, but I still deserve all of the appreciation in the world for my excellent work." "You have done well," Hellori said to keep him motivated. "We've never had this many awakened mages before, let alone with each of them having so much mana thanks to being able to plan their awakenings. With things going like this, we might be able to save more of our power for the 3rd wave." "What? Boo, suffer with the rest of us. We will be putting in plenty of work, don't doubt that," Nair sighed. "But planning out the portion spent is going to be important. Trust us, no matter what we do in this one, demons will slip past us, so it's far better to accept that some will get by to let us focus on containing the absolute monsters of the 3rd wave." "Okay. How bad are we talking?" "By our estimates, demons likely reach their sapient stage around the 7th or 8th level of their minor soul magic," the god explained. "You won't expect to see any with awakened skills in the mixed dash. Not trusting that since we definitely got a few in the 1st wave. Alright, true enough I suppose, but the point is that it would be an insignificant amount. For the 3rd wave though, we're expecting roughly 1% to be awakened, with many more being on the edge of it, though it's a bit hard to be sure given that by that point, they'll have had a couple years to enjoy the benefits of the system." "Oh, so we're like screwed. Okay. I had been considering making a will ever since the Outsider incident, but I guess I don't really need to at this point, do I? I wonder if I could hypothetically get Vividus to remodel my body to function as a void species? I'm a bit more attached to being alive than being human. As long as the changes aren't too massive, then I can probably deal with them." "Can you please not be so defeatist about this?" Myriad sighed. "We'll be doing our best. Everyone across the planet will be. Just have some faith. Not going to lie, I'm feeling a little lacking, buddy, but I'll at least hold off on trying to beg the Great Life Spirit for that sort of help until it looks like they're going to start fleeing the planet too. Unless we look particularly doomed after this coming one, then all bets are off." Ben had a good idea of how strong awakened skill holders were going to be, and had no difficulty imagining how bad things would be against the tens or hundreds of thousands that would be flooding through the gate in the 3rd wave to come. Against the paltry few thousand that he knew the world had, any optimism felt like insanity. Oh well, he told himself, trying to force his fears for the future into the recesses of his thoughts. Just gotta focus on what I have going on now instead. After a far too depressing night with the gods, spent trying to ignore the constant feeling of impending doom that every piece of information about the oncoming invasion filled him with, Ben got up for the day, preparing not only his regular meals for Thera and Sonia, but packing some to bring for Dallaire, Fontesh, Sakhel, and Raelia too, the first 2 as a treat and the latters both because he did feel slightly bad about dropping guests on them, even if they didn't seem to mind, as well as because neither seemed to do any cooking themselves, or at the very least didn't put enough effort in to get the actual skill for it. He handed it off as soon as he got there, with Dallaire's meal being eaten on the way as he led her through town, with the girl practically buzzing with excitement the entire time and only being elevated after arriving at the shop as she ran around, looking at the various items on display while Ben let her have her fun exploring everything until she calmed down enough to start the day. Since he'd have her for a few days, he decided that he wouldn't introduce the clones he'd work through immediately, instead choosing to leave that for the next day as he instead focused on setting her up. He was constantly being told he worked too hard after all. Having an easy day for once was a good way to make sure nobody felt the need to force him onto any more disastrous vacations, and with that frame of mind he began to demonstrate what she'd be doing that day. Getting her started in much the same way Falk had started him, by having her make her own tongs and hammer first. Unlike his own teacher, though, after giving the initial demonstration he stuck around to watch her progress, giving pointers and advice where he saw fit as she did her best until the tongs at least were complete, with the hammer being put on hold with the sound of the door opening. "Hey Falk, ready for a brand new day of fun? As ever, I suppose. And who's this?" Dallaire had already moved in front of Ben's teacher, staring up at him in awe before not answering his question. "You're so tall." With Dallaire standing at just barely 4.5 feet while Falk was a little over 8, it wasn't an incorrect statement by any stretch, making Ben quietly laugh to the side as his teacher looked at him helplessly. "Dallaire, this is Falk, my teacher." "Falk, this is Dallaire, my student." "Ah, the one you said you'd take in." His teacher nodded. "Good to meet ya, though the timing's a bit. She's only going to be here for a couple days. I just thought it would be fun to show her some things," he explained, leaving it implied that he was doing it while he knew he still could with his teacher catching on and nodding. "All right. I'll be around a bit today, so if you need anything just let me know. If you find this story on Amazon, be aware that it has been stolen. Please report the infringement." The offer genuinely surprised Ben a bit. He knew his teacher hadn't actually wanted to take in any students of his own originally. He hadn't been expecting to be offered any help while she was there. Of course, now that he's completed his goal, I guess he's more flexible. Plus, he's had years to see how wonderful I am to have around. No way that my lovely presence hasn't been able to open him up to the joys of having students. "Boy, why does it look like you're thinking something stupid? Because you're judging my pretty face way too harshly? But more importantly, I actually was going to ask you for a small favor for her if you don't mind? Let's hear it at least." "I was hoping you'd make her a bracelet," he asked, holding up his wrist to show off the one Falk had made him. The same one that gave him bonuses equivalent to a completed job. "So you really want to spoil her, huh?" His teacher sighed, even as he gave in to the small request, holding out a hand for some metals as Ben materialized them before they were shaped and enchanted under the Yeti's power and fitted around Dallaire's wrist. "Not going into the details, but make sure you keep that on and don't lose it. All right? All right, but what's it do?" she asked him as she eyed the enchantment with her limited mana sense, trying to understand the point of it. "It will help you grow your attributes a bit faster," Ben said before holding a finger to his lips. "But keep that a secret. If people find out, then they'd never stop bothering him about it. MMH, you're just getting one as a favor to the boy, so make sure you work hard while you're around. And don't mind Falk's tone so much. He's really a big softy. Boy dash. You are, Sonia agrees, so if you don't like it, complain to her." "MMH, maybe I will," he grumbled before going to the side to do some of his own work, leaving the two to focus on Dallaire's projects. "He's funny. And an excellent teacher. If we have some time later, I'll get you to look at him work a bit, but for now let's get back to it. You still have a hammer to make after all." She nodded at that, going back to the area Ben had set up for her and watched as she began, following along with the things he told her until her most important tools were ready for use. None of it was quick, but then, she was just starting. She needed time and guidance to grow, even if she'd been properly reading everything he'd been sending her, and Ben felt a bit of excitement about getting to watch it happen. At the very least, it was obvious that she wanted to learn from him, making the entire process significantly more worthwhile compared to helping his last batch of students, and it seemed like she enjoyed the process of it too. Which means I've just got to keep nurturing from there. Let's see, a bit more time at the forge today and then on to potions like I'd planned, plus some time watching Falk work since there's not going to be many opportunities to see a third-tier crafting skill in action, followed by a few more advanced enchanting techniques since she's skilled enough at this point that she can probably do a bit more than just laying a skill down, and from there maybe pull her into my head for a bit if she doesn't seem too tired. Okay, looks like it's going to be a full day. He didn't immediately outline all of that though, instead just patting her head before outlining what was to come next. "So now that you've got a hammer and tongs, it looks like it's time to get you on to making some J-hooks." After letting Dallaire see his clones the following day and continuing her training while watching her through them, his main body sat a little to the side, focusing instead on the new material he had to work with, the Void Stone he had created with Jake. It had already developed the condensate around it, the fabric of reality thickening in the material's presence and waiting to be experimented on, or at least more than it already had been. He still had the researcher's various results kicking around his head, but he wanted to experience a few of the results with his own two hands, starting with scratching at it with a knife and feeling the outer layer cut. So it is pretty soft, which reduces its usefulness a little. Also means that if I choose to enchant on it, then I'd need a protective layer on the outside, though I can think of a few potential ways around it. Which started with removing all of the surface layer to claim some of the stone within, looking at the black material as he once more tested its durability and finding something significantly tougher, to the point that he had no complaints in that regard, even if his next tests of enchanting on it didn't yield close to the same results. After applying too much, the material broke as he would expect of most things, with it reacting like he'd expect of any sort of regular matter. Which is definitely a point for the surface layer not being regular matter, even if they end up being wrong about it being condensed reality. So how would I use it from there? And just as importantly, what sorts of enchantments would suit it? That was another round of testing, one that yielded what he felt was the expected result, even if it was good to confirm it. Best performance came from space enchantments, telling him the direction he'd be going with the material as an idea for an enchantment already entered his head. One he was almost certain would be enough to break into legendary as he got to work. The first thing he did was take the Void Stone and shaped a thin strip of it into a concave ring, letting the hollow of it fill with the secondary material until he was sure it was done and placed his enchantments down, not paying the regular attention to how much he believed it could hold before breaking and instead moving to just place down all he could, creating a density of enchantments that would make it look like he'd simply placed down the entirety of a skill in the mana sense of most people. Once that was done, he inserted a few small, set mana crystals to provide power before covering the ring with another layer of Void Stone, and then further covered it in mithril, with that final layer preventing more space from condensing around it with his newest ring complete, the second item to make it to the middle grade of legendary. God, I really am so good at everything I do. He smiled to himself as he admired his work, right before testing it out. If you come across this story on Amazon, it's taken without permission from the author. Report it. Slipping the ring on his finger, he first materialized a hammer in his hand before activating the ring, watching as the hammer vanished and demonstrated that at least half of the ring's purpose was functioning properly, leaving only the other half as he directed his thoughts to it and felt the ring link to his mind, revealing its contents as he prompted it to once more take out the hammer, leaving it to appear in his hand. Yep, the world is not ready for me to have new magic materials to play with. Once a few more are properly understood, I'm going to go wild. Plus, with the enchanting density possible on Void Stone, it means that I should be able to use it to carry a lot of the density I'm going to need for Onyx. God, if I don't die, then things are going to go crazy. The spatial ring he created wasn't unlimited, he'd only be able to carry about a cubic meter of stuff with it, though not exactly those dimensions but instead volume, meaning he'd be able to store plenty in there for himself, not to mention letting others do the same. He was already making more with the volume of stone he had, assembling more rings for the people in his life, given how useful they were sure to be to everyone, and thinking on how to fill them. He was probably just going to shove his full of food and potions for the coming invasion, while for Thera it would act as a convenient storage for both staves and armors. Neither Sonia nor Falk were actually going to have to deal with the invasion points themselves, so they could figure out what to put in them themselves, and as for his friends, he'd just add some general defensive items and potions for when he sent them over. His various homunculi began moving with those thoughts, all of them beginning to make the items he'd need to enchant on as his main body was left to its own devices, thinking about what to do next. Only a few of the other materials had immediately caught his eye, but there were problems with all of them. He wanted to make more faith stone so badly. A material that was able to rip the faith from the gods via the people they had a connection to was inherently interesting to him and begging to be played with the only issue of that being that it would be hard to test without stealing some from the many gods he knew and got along with. And then there was the final one he'd looked at, the one that seemed entirely unreactive to mana after its creation. Even if he couldn't work it himself, he had ideas for it he would love to test, with the stopping factor for it being the overwhelming level of mana he'd need to make it work. He wouldn't need to just get Thera's help in filling up his soul. He'd need her constant help to get any volume of the stuff to make it worth working with or experimenting on, and even then likely not getting enough to make anything truly interesting. The cost was just way too high, which is just such a waste. He complained to himself. Sure, I could take a couple weeks and make a bullet or two of the stuff, and it will probably get easier if I get another level of material manipulation, but I don't think I'm going to be getting to the point where I'd even be able to try forging something with it. Ugh, so lame. Maybe I'll manage to find a workaround eventually, or maybe I'll be able to find the will to chip away at it slowly, but for now, it's a skip, which doesn't leave me much. Feeling the limits of what he couldn't help but consider the most exciting options, Ben moved on and materialized another he'd seen that increased in density with every bit of mana that passed through it, and did his best to content himself with experimenting with that, all as the day passed. "Looks good," Ben said as he examined the set of carefully forged carving knives, patting Delaire's head as he did. "Do you think you'll be able to use them comfortably?" "I will. I made them for me after all." "Ha, good answer. In that case, put them to use and let's see how you handle them." He handed her a piece of soft wood to work, watching as she slowly shaped it into the form of a simple yet lovely flower, one he recognized from her home village before she handed it to him. "Yep, looks good," he told her brightly as he looked it over. "You've got a talent for woodworking in particular, I'd say, but the strength of having a general crafting skill is its broadness. You haven't had much time at the forge or doing alchemy, but you seem to be picking both up pretty well. Have you enjoyed trying them out?" "I have, it's been fun. I wish I could do more when I get back home." She sounded depressed as she thought about it. With her time practicing her skills with Ben already nearing its end despite only just getting to try those new activities, leaving her wanting more. Even if she intended for it to be her means of work one day in the future, for the time being it was fun and a distraction from the world, not something she was in a hurry to end. It was a feeling Ben understood as well, the desire to throw oneself into their projects to escape the world around them. But the future wasn't that kind. All things were going to need to come to an end with the battle that was on the horizon, putting a time limit on everything. But at least she seems a bit better than she did before the first wave. I guess a year can change a lot for kids. Still, it wasn't a topic he wanted to dwell on for either of their sakes, so instead he moved to focus on a different task for them. "Okay. Well, since things look good here, let's focus on something else. After all, when I'm not around you're in charge of practicing by yourself, so what sorts of things would you like to make?" She thought for a moment as her mind flashed across anything and everything she'd like to try creating, ending with an answer that surprised him. "I want to learn how to make sheds." "Sheds?" Not everyone has one, and Grandma's been trying to get everyone to make and preserve more food to be safe, but there's not much room for storing everything, so I want to help out." "Well then, we'll have to get you set up. It's going to be a lot of work though. Sure you can handle it? The narrative has been illicitly obtained. Should you discover it on Amazon, report the violation." "I can." "Good. In that case, let's get started." In a normal situation, Ben would have been happy enough to get her some lumber to teach her from there. But her village made that a bit more complicated than it needed to be as he flashed back to his own time helping out there, remembering everything he'd needed to do just to complete all of his repairs, changing the starting point of his lessons to one on how to safely chop down trees and dry wood, creating an item for her that would help speed up the process to a matter of hours, so she wouldn't be left waiting months for it to reach a workable point before showing her how to break down a log into usable strips, creating the tools they'd need as they worked through one together to give her a feel for the difficulty of the task and how long it would take her when she was alone. Even with her current skill level, it was going to be a multi-day process for just one. Her strength still low even after enjoying months of the potions Ben had been sending her for all of the work it was going to take to be anything easy, making it a good piece of training for her that was only going to have more obstacles on top of it. Aside from just building a foundation to build on each time, he knew the Dryads only had access to metals through their merchant and relying on them wasn't going to work, so instead he showed her different ways of joining and interlocking wood with itself, all to create something that would hold together without the touch of iron, even if it meant the work was going to be both harder and longer for it. But good practice at least. Doing things this way means a lot of precision carving for her, Even if it will leave her a little woodwork focused, but she can make up for that by continuing on with helping her mom cook and doing some art on the side. And before she leaves I should show her how to use the destructive aspects of her enchanting for carving too. Plus I could make her some better stone working tools. It's never too soon to start up on that, and it's safe enough, even if she might need to look for some good stone to work with. Oh, what the heck, when I drop her off I'll steal a bunch of Thera's mana and materialize her a few good options for her to practice with. Which also means I could materialize a few softer metals for her to work with too. But no. It wouldn't be the same as having her work the forge, and since I wouldn't be around to watch her I'm not making her one of those. She can practice with everything else and that should be good enough. Already planning all he'd need to prepare for her by the time she left. The list only continued to grow as he thought of everything he wanted to make for her to use when he wasn't around as the two continued to work through their project. The task being far faster than it would be if she were taking it on alone, even with him trying to do as little as he could to instead focus on giving her the guidance she would need. It was late by the time they were done. The young girl exhausted from the work but looking proud as she admired the shed they'd constructed before her. "You did excellent, kiddo," Ben told her as he picked her up to carry back to Satchel's for the night. "Think you'll be able to do it yourself when you get back?" "I will. But maybe a little slower." "Ha! Speed comes with practice, so don't worry about doing things fast. Focus on doing them right and the rest will come with time." "I will, but Ben?" "Yes, Dallaire. I'm hungry and Satchel still can't cook." That got a laugh from him. "In that case, I'll come in for a bit and whip something up with whatever she has on hand. But that means you've got to help too. You know that, right?" "I will," she happily agreed, sounding significantly less tired even with the prospect of more work coming her way as they went off to prepare a meal for the night. Dallaire was looking sad that day, standing with her mother given what was to come. The two were going to join him to watch as he enchanted a couple of gates, but from there they'd be dropped off back at their home village, left to deal with their own preparations for the coming war. Now that Fontesh had an awakened skill, it was doubtless that Hentath and the village as a whole would have some work for her to help with, even with the sheer number of awakened skill holders that village was going to have after getting Ben's help. There was nothing to be done about that though, so all Ben could do was try to entertain Dallaire as they all waited in front of the shop, with the two they were expecting appearing with a hole in space. "Been a while, strangers," Ben said happily as Steph and Will made their appearance. "No Wedro this time?" "He had other work," Steph explained as she went to hug both him and Thera. "Or at least he says, but I think he just wasn't a fan of having mana shoved into him like that last time. But anyway, who else do we have here?" "My little apprentice and her mom, Dallaire and Fontesh." "Dallaire and Fontesh, this is Steph and Will. Hope you don't mind, but I already volunteered you to help get them home. One of the gates we'll be enchanting is already close to their village, and I've come bearing payment." "Sure, I don't mind. What did you make this time then?" He handed over 2 rings when she asked, with Will eyeing his. "I do like you, buddy, but I'm not sure I'm ready to tie the knot yet. Maybe make me a couple more dinners first." "You'll change your mind after you try them on?" Ben laughed, enjoying the sight of them putting them on and their eyes immediately widening once their minds filled with options as both of them pulled out things to look at before putting them back. "Man, how did you?" "What can I say, I'm just good," he laughed, with Steph having her own thoughts. "Legendary. Middle of it," he told her with a shrug, not having expected her to ask, with the question prompting both Dallaire and Fontesh to look at the rings he'd made them in surprise, with him not having bothered to mention that small fact to either of them. Fontesh immediately looked like she was going to try to return it, but Ben was already holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't worry about the ranking, I gave them to you guys, so use them. But maybe don't spread their rankings around, that's a pretty good way to get robbed if word gets out of your village." "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with accepting a fortune." "What fortune?" he asked as he materialized a chunk of white mana crystal and tossed it to her. "I materialized the parts one needed and enchanted the rest. Not a single cent went into making them. You know that has nothing to do with their value. As the only one who can make them and without any on the market, I'm the guy who currently sets their value. It just so happens I've set the value to 0. It still looked like she was uncomfortable knowing that she'd been casually given something that nations would want to bid over, but Ben had already moved on and was focusing back on his friends, Telling Steph what areas they were going to hit first and where the village they'd need to stop into was to drop the two off, with their plans fully outlined from there as they began, opening a few different gates to get to their first stop. Alright, we'll be taking this one a little slower than I actually need to, so Dallaire, watch carefully. Thera, you remember how we did this last time? Yeah. I'll move you two around the arch. Cool. And now, most important of all, where is my payment? His god told him. Unauthorized tail usage. If you spot this story on Amazon, report the violation. Works for me. Then let's get started. With her mana sense, Dallaire watched him work as he took his time on the task. For him, it was taking his time at least. By that point, he was sure he could reduce his previous record of a few minutes down even lower, but out of consideration for her, he was looking at taking 20 minutes for it. An eternity for him, but still a fraction of what the world had been used to until then, as her brow wrinkled in concentration. I don't understand any of this, she eventually said in defeat, getting a small chuckle from Ben. That's because I'm using a technique that's only possible to pull off in a complete form if you have both an awakened enchanting as well as some massive mental augmentations. But it's all built off principles I've already shown you. Look here, you can see how the weave and ring methods are being combined to create something greater, which are both things you'll be practicing by yourself now that you've gotten a bit of experience with them, and even if you can't currently pull off the blending method, that's built into it as well. Everything's just going to come down to time and practice, but if you work hard enough, then I'll make sure you can do this as well one day. Ben, I can't use space magic. Neither can I. There's a handy little workaround I'll get you in the future if you still want to be an enchanter in a couple years. Sure, why not? I owe him some skills anyway, might as well pay him to teach her while he's here. I could get her to learn a couple mind skills while I'm at it too to help her out with things. I can already think of how to manage that safely, don't worry. There was no real issue with mental expansion or focus, so both of those are fine to teach her, and the issues between complex mind and parallel thought came from the way parallel thought would split my minds when they'd already grown under the effects of complex mind. If I get her to the 8th or 9th level of parallel thought first and then get her complex mind after, she'll have already gone through the thought-splitting aspects of it, so she shouldn't be harmed by just gaining 2 new minds for every level of the other skill. I'm not going to make her learn anything she doesn't want to. If she doesn't want the skills, then she doesn't need to get them. It's just something I'll discuss with her in the future. Oh, but I'll probably get her to learn some thought speed skills at least. They're just plain handy for enchanting quickly, and seeing as how they aren't passive, she can decide for herself if she doesn't want to use them. And I'm ignoring you now. After finishing up that gate and answering Dallaire's questions, Ben went into the network briefly to make his new skill rings, feeling a little discouraged with what he was seeing. He gained higher levels of the magics he already had access to. That was true, but just as Myriad had warned, he wasn't getting many that had reached his maximum potential when it came to enchanting for anything he was seeing. Almost everyone was at the 2nd or 3rd awakened level at their highest, with only a few there that had gone beyond that into the upper realms of their individual talents, with that fact disappointing him to no end. His own skill and techniques would continue to grow, but having access to higher-leveled skills to enchant with thanks to the rest of the people in the world certainly made things easier on him, and by a long shot too. High-leveled abilities, be they broad or specialized, both had power and potential for him to squeeze out of them so long as he could get them on his fingers, letting him create better, stronger items when the limits of his own skills and techniques hit their walls. It was an easy way for him to get just a little bit more out of the things he'd make, but with that being something beyond his control, it seemed that soon enough he'd have no choice but to focus solely on the things he could improve by himself instead of hoping he'd be able to keep finding more. It wasn't like he was going to stop looking each time he went out, still planning on stretching out his soul to peek at those around him to see if they had anything interesting for him to claim. But it was a limiting factor in not only the item rankings he might manage to achieve but also for a few of his projects. Without higher-leveled skills to access, doing things like finally building Onyx, his body was going to hit a bit of a roadblock that he'd need to get past through leveling his skills and refining his techniques. And I'm not sure if I can even refine my enchanting technique anymore beyond the basic stuff, he thought with a sigh. I've already gone farther than I ever would have been able to without a bit of luck. As much as getting to that point sucked, getting the ring system was a boon, and so was finding the enchanting modifier from there. Without those, I'd still just be managing with the weave and blending systems alone. Plus, it doesn't look like any of the world's other enchanting systems have much potential to be incorporated into my work, so barring a few years or decades of research, I may just be out of luck. Oh well, I guess all I can do is just keep trying to shrink the amount of mana I put in my enchantments and improve the precision I place them down at. Even if that's it, it's what enchanters the world over do. It will have to be good enough. Even if he was slowly losing one of his shortcuts to improvement, he still had other methods. He'd just need to keep putting in the work and gaining his levels to get there. Ben completed the second gate. He was to enchant far faster than the first to let Delaire see everything he was capable of and gave her a sense of what was possible as one's skill improved, enjoying as he watched just how excited it made her before it was finally time to drop the two off back home, leading to the inevitable goodbye as Ben started to both pull things out of his ring as well as materialize what he could for her, stealing Thera's mana to make more. Okay. Books, tools, materials, and a few £100 of different stones to try working with if you're ever feeling up to it. I think you have everything you could need to stay busy for a couple years, Ben told her, patting her head as she hugged him goodbye. Anything else you think you'll need? No, she pouted. Not ready to be done, but understanding he had work to do. This is plenty. Okay. Then work hard and be good for your mom. All right, kiddo? Give it 2 more years, and as long as you haven't gotten sick of it, you can train under me full-time. Assuming we're all still here. God, the negativity really does just slip in so easily. Doesn't it? He didn't let it touch his face, though, as he got a smile and a nod for the promise, with Delaire saying she'd do her best with her practice while her mother thanked him for all of his time before the 4 went off from there to finish the rest of the gates, with plenty still to go. It was obvious from what he was seeing that a lot of them weren't constructed as well as many of the older gates had been, with his skill in enchanting being trusted to compensate for a slightly lower quality of craftsmanship. But there had still been over 100 new ones made on the surface, plus a few more he'd need to do as well, all of it slowly linking up the world and creating more spaces for others to evacuate to, all while allowing for even more resources to move around. And combining his increase in skill and enchanting speed with the ability to keep forcing mana into Steph to help them travel about, they'd finish the new ones in a matter of hours, with the real limiting factor being both how long it took to get to each location, as well as how busy any place ended up being. There were more than a few areas that had crowds out and waiting, each curious to see the birth of a new gate, with reactions being either surprise over how fast it ended up being or disappointment that that was all there was to it, no matter how ridiculous the latter was. Even if the creation of a gate was a rare thing and even if the world changed with each one, it was never going to be particularly visual, with the only real point of interest being when it opened for everyone to see. Once all of that was done, though, the 4 of them went for a meal together in their final town, catching up as they did before they parted, with Will and Steph having their own work and preparations to get back to, while Ben and Thera's last task didn't require them going somewhere lacking a gate, as they instead passed through the network to a coastal city, walking to the water to see what waited for them. During Ben's first round of enchanting, he'd gone to every gate he could reasonably be expected to, but there were some that stood beyond his reach, even with the help of the space mages. The aquatic gates, on a slightly separate network from the one he was used to in order to keep from flooding the world, had all been out of his reach, at least at the time, but given the severity of their situation, it seemed the gods had decided to change that, having each of them removed from where they had sat, some of which had been there for centuries, all to be carried out for him to work on along with what more they could make in the time they had as well, giving him a new mountain of work to get to, with the one who had handled most of their transportation flying over to greet them. Unauthorized use. This story is on Amazon without permission from the author. Report any sightings. Or perhaps floated would have been a better descriptor, as what looked like a frozen eel moved under its own power towards them, with Thera waving happily. Uncle Salinoth, it's been a while, she told him with a smile, happy to be in the presence of one of the great spirits whose company she enjoyed. Only on your timescale, Thera. Or do you prefer Princess now, seeing as that's what all of the little ones seem to go for? Ugh, Thera, please. I can't convince them to stop. That got a laugh from him as he looked her over. Well, I suppose I can see why. The nature of the mana you radiate has changed since I've last seen you. A little trick I've learned, but it helps the spirits grow, so I typically just keep it up when I'm not doing anything else. Ah, no wonder they've grown to love you so much. And this is your lover? Your father talks about him frequently during his visits. Good things, I hope. Ben joined in. It's nice to meet you. I'm Ben. Nothing but good things, the spirit agreed. He seems to be as happy that Thera found you as he is to have his wife. So curious how much a person can change in a few short millennia. I'll say, Thera sighed. Have you heard the news about Encetus yet? News? Has someone finally found what's been keeping that fool so occupied these last few years? Okay, this is going to be quite the conversation. Ben, come here and I'll let you get to work while I catch up with my uncle for a couple minutes. She reached out and poured his mana into him, overfilling his soul before she started explaining how her uncle had disappeared for a few years to have a child. Letting Ben walk over to the water's edge where the gates laid beneath the waves, taking off his shoes to walk in as he placed his hands along the surface of the first to start placing the enchantments. In every way that mattered, they were the same as the ones he was used to doing, with only a minor difference in the section that acted as a marker for where they would link, creating a portal to that different network before he moved on to the next and so on, making as many as he could until he needed to go back to refill his mana, finding the great water spirit no longer frozen. That absolute fool, Salanoth spat, his anger altering the form he'd constructed for himself. At least it sounds like this has forced some maturity on him. If there were any among us who could have used that, I suppose this is a positive, but well, despite him, you should make some time to visit. Insha is a sweetheart despite the bastard raising her, and her mother helps keep him in line, which I'd call a positive. And if he ever does anything to hurt her, I know my father along with Lux and Funa would be happy to murder him with me, so the more hands the better. Okay, Ben broke in. Ignoring the scary conversation I've walked into, I need just a bit more mana, pretty please. She transferred over her mana while keeping up the conversation on just how she'd dispose of her uncle if he ever ended up mistreating her cousin, while at the same time convincing the great water spirit to meet the girl. Letting Ben get back to completing his work, with the same reward for the land ones waiting for him when he was done as heads and limbs started coming up from the aquatic gates. Letting him connect to claim what skills they had for even more rings and watching as his library grew, even if the same problem persisted. On land or sea, people either could or would only grow so much. But it's a couple more for my collection at least, even if I'm hitting my limits. And with that done, time to head home. Across the span of the world, there were no more gates for him to enchant, and once Thera was done with her uncle, the two went off, happy to get some rest after the long day. Thera woke up to the sounds of chatter around her and the smell of cooking, two things that would normally pull her from her slumber, with both the spirits around her enjoying her ambient mana and Ben out making breakfast, even if there was a difference about the sounds she was hearing that day as she opened her eyes to find something unusual amongst the mass of mana that was floating around her. Not just the dense points of mana she was used to seeing from her paternal race, but also some that were more spread out. A different form of mana-based life with earth and water elementals in the mix. Hello, she greeted them, more awake than usual from the surprise of their presence, as they almost seemed to shuffle about, acting as though they'd been caught as they looked between each other, with one speaking up. Hello, princess. An earth elemental began as Thera raised her hand. Please, just call me Thera. I do not want to end up with Elemental Princess as a title if calling me that catches on among them. It was hard enough to get Ben to stop laughing when Spirit Princess caught on. Thera then. Forgive the intrusion, we shall be on our way. Wait, hold on, you don't need to leave, I was just surprised. Should I take it you can also make use of my mana? It shouldn't have shocked her. She'd already seen that she could share her mana with Insha and Rocky in the same way, and her skill was called Mana Empowering. There was no reason to think the elementals couldn't have made use of it, especially since she didn't know how comparable their reproduction was to a spirit's. But she'd been caught off guard, with the one speaking confirming as much. We heard about it from the spirits and were curious. Apologies for not asking first. It's fine, I don't make the spirits ask either, so if any elementals want to take what they can while I'm asleep, then go for it. I don't mind. Really? It asked, sounding hopeful, with all of the spirits around chiming in before she could say anything. Our princess is generous dash, kind dash, thoughtful dash, wonderful dash, the best dash. I really don't mind, so it's fine, she cut in, adding only one request. But please, just let any other elementals know to just call me Thera. It doesn't matter how many of you come. With how far her passive mana would spread out, she was sure the entire house was filled, and if she kept the effect up once she went out, then it would stretch far beyond it. Even if a few thousand elementals joined in at any given time, it wouldn't make much difference to her, and if it would help them, then why would she say no? It got a strong reaction though, with the ones already in her room buzzing about in excitement, the ones speaking for them sounding thrilled. Thank you. The spirits are right to talk of you so highly. Thanks. Just to be clear though, how often do they talk about me when I'm not around? Constantly. Great. No clue how I'm supposed to react to that, so just gonna pretend I never asked. At the very least, she didn't collect titles for that fact the way Ben seemed to, which was good enough for her as she finally got up to start the day. She didn't know how bad of a sign to take it as, but going out that day with Aso, they encountered another demon. So many of them had gotten into the world in such a short time, even if she'd only seen a handful herself, that adventurers across the planet were busy fighting and killing them constantly, even if most who were just serving in their towns had likely only come across one or two, with many not witnessing any at all. It all came down to numbers and luck, with how things had turned out at least acting as a decent experience for her friend. Unlike the first time Aso had encountered one, this time she was prepared, still suffering under the same system effect that was forcing her to view it as a person but compartmentalizing that to see it as an enemy as she did her best to go up against it for the practice and experience it would provide. Given that the third wave was sure to be worse, Thera wanted her friend to get every bit of experience she could until that point, even if it was going to be hard and watched from the side, ready to step in if need be, but was willing to see her struggle a bit as she went up against the beast. As both a light and fire mage, she'd already allowed the creature to get too close, but there wasn't much helping that. Both of them were mages, and Aso didn't seem too interested in finding a different party, meaning she had nobody to fill a warrior role to keep them in place, nor anyone to lure them in. It wasn't exactly something Thera could comment on though, given the way she'd done things, so she let it be, instead watching as the other fought, creating illusions to trick the demon briefly before its other senses told the creature they were fake, and burning it with her fire while dodging its oncoming attacks, getting a few cuts herself when the thing got too close, but otherwise handling herself during it all until it briefly looked like the monster had gained the lead when it jumped in, only to be felled by the knife she kept on her hip, cutting across it and letting her finish it with the bite of her fire from a safe distance. Once done, Aso slumped over, looking exhausted from the ordeal as Thera moved to her side to encourage her. "Good work, you handled that really well," she said positively. "But don't wait to heal your wounds. Demons are tricky and adaptable. You have no way to know if there's going to be poison or something else on their claws that you don't want to wait to deal with. Right?" The girl nodded as she started healing herself, obviously tired from the fight as Thera went on, broaching a different subject that she knew needed to be addressed before she left to face the next wave. "And have you still not found any party to join?" That question got a grimace. "MMH, no. I'm honestly not super interested in anyone in town." "Okay. Mind if I ask why not?" "This tale has been unlawfully lifted from Royal Road. Report any instances of this story if found elsewhere." While Thera had her own issues with the adventurers of Stonewall, there was no reason for anything to be holding Aso back. As far as she knew, the girl didn't have a bad history with any of them, and she was even well thought of in town, not only from acting as one of the healers but also for being their clinic head's daughter. As far as she could see, there should have been people lining up to work with her, if only for the hope that she'd be able to get them some priority healing if things ever went wrong. To Thera's surprise though, it seemed like she was more involved in the choice than she'd expected as Aso explained with some embarrassment. "Because we're friends." The answer instantly made the earth under her feet shake in her anger. Was Aso being mistreated just because the girl dared to get along with her? If that really was the case, then she was mere moments from tearing away the ground below to fly to the guild and beat every adventurer there to a bloody pulp with her bare fists, only holding back the impulse as Aso reached out to stop her. "Wait! That's not what I mean," she yelled, seeing the misunderstanding she'd caused. "I meant we're friends, so I don't want to work with someone who doesn't treat you well or only does because they're afraid of you, so don't give them a new reason to be afraid of you." That pacified her rage, even if it created other issues as she reached out and gently rubbed her friend's head. "Okay, I won't murder anyone and I appreciate the thought, but things are gonna get dangerous, also. I know you go out by yourself when I'm not around and I'm not around a lot. Heck, I'm probably gonna be away a lot more once the next wave is in full force and the world's going to be significantly more dangerous at that point. I'm not gonna tell you not to go without me, but you really need to find someone else to work with. It doesn't matter if they don't like me. If you die, it would break my heart. MMH. But if I joined up with anyone and they badmouthed you, I'd definitely crack them over the head, she said, waving her staff to emphasize the point. That is a problem. Which means it needs to be someone I know won't talk bad about me behind my back, which is admittedly pretty hard. Or I guess someone who it would be okay to hit. Wait, don't I know a group that would have both? Okay then, in that case let's go. I know exactly who you could join up with. She thought she might need to invade their home to find them, but Thera came across the exact party she was looking for as the two of them went to report the completion of their quests, with Sakhel, Raelia, and Sko sitting down at a table, the first of them already waving her over. Thera also, hey, Sakhel called out. How'd things go today? Well, we ran into a demon, but she handled it calmly enough and managed to get the kill without my help. Thera told them proudly, feeling personally pleased with Aso's growth. How about you guys? Take any quests today? Not today, we're actually just here to hang out. We've got our point to go to, and since we're leaving in a couple of days, we wanted to relax a bit while we can and chat with folks. You know? Right, she's fighting in the invasion too. That could be a problem. Will you guys be coming back when they close again? The week after, Raelia answered. By then they'll have spread out so much and Stonewall needs protecting too. Same as any other place. Perfect. In that case, there was something I wanted to ask you all. You guys have 2 frontline fighters and 1 backline. When you return, take another mage. She patted Aso's back as she said it, making it clear who she was referring to as the group looked amongst themselves for a moment, speaking with their eyes before Sakhel spoke up. I personally don't mind. Sakhel, working with a beginner is a bit. Sko trailed off, trying at least to be polite, even if Thera still glared at him. What? Are you saying you wouldn't benefit from another backline fighter? One who has different magics from your other mage, I might add. Plus, she isn't a beginner. She's been at this for almost 2 years now. Okay, but having a second mage isn't super important, he argued. Look at you, it's not like you use a traditional party when your main partner is a craftsman. Our composition works fine. The difference is that Ben could kill the 3 of you without much effort. Thera told him coldly, with that answer making both Sko and Raelia look to Sakhel for her own thoughts. Aside from being their powerhouse by virtue of holding a second-tier skill, she was also the one who knew them best as high-ranking members of the same faith, and she briefly thought it over. I'd personally run if it somehow came down to us fighting, she said with a shrug, handily closing any comparisons between the 2 parties. While Sakhel had only really seen Ben fight the same time as her other 2 party members when he dueled the man who had come to win over Thera, she was aware that he had more awakened skills than he'd let on, and that all of that growth had come in the few short years he'd been on the world, not to mention some of the other things she'd seen from him. The way he'd calmly spoken in her head after having been disassembled in the Life Tower as he instructed her on how to put his body back together was something that was going to haunt her nightmares forever. She didn't want to ever go up against someone who could do that. It was the answer Thera had wanted as well, and she gave a positive nod when she got it. There. My party has nothing to do with yours, and you wouldn't be hurt in any way having her. Both fire and light magic would give you guys more options, and I'm not even asking you to take her in permanently, just when you're back and I'm off dealing with other things. If you'd want her to join you on a more regular basis after that is a discussion you can have in the future. So are you willing to do that? We will, Raelia agreed, casting her own vote on the matter and giving a majority as she looked to Sko. Everyone starts somewhere, and it would be good for her to get experience working in a team. As high-ranked adventurers, we need to help with raising up the newer recruits. Okay, but this isn't exactly the time? Then when would it be? The snake woman laughed. Even if we win, the world's going to have a demon problem forever, and until that point anyone who can fight is important. Better she works with us for a bit and grows her skills more with the bit of safety we can provide than we leave her on her own to either die alone or when things get bad enough here and she doesn't have the skills to handle it. Sorry, Sko, majority rules. Thera gave her a nod of thanks before turning to address Aso. So there you have it. Even if it's going to be a while until you officially start working with them, talk to them for a bit and figure things out, and remember, if Sko mistreats you in any way, then just tell me and I'll ask the spirits to hide his body somewhere nobody would ever find. It would be easy enough to get it dragged to the center of the planet, and without witnesses we wouldn't have to worry, so don't hesitate. Okay. Aso nodded happily at that, while Sko felt a shiver go down his spine at how matter-of-factly she said it, making him truly believe she was fully willing to carry out that threat before she turned to thank them one more time and went off, happy with how things had turned out as she headed home. So that's one problem done. As long as none of them die during the next wave and Aso doesn't do anything stupid until we're all back, then things will be fine. That just leaves that. Perfect. It was a job she'd been gaining passive experience for, and any time she wasn't equipping her mana empowering to her soul, she had her brace on to suppress whatever dark effect she was intentionally giving off, making that a quick one as she lightly touched her necklace, getting nothing new to choose from and leaving her to take what she'd already been planning, War Mage. A few of those levels were enough to raise an eyebrow at, especially the sleep resistance given how much effort she'd just put into raising it and what gaining a level implied for the expectations of a mage going to war, but all of it would be useful to her, just like any skill would be, and given the name of the job itself, she'd be gaining a flood of experience soon enough. All she'd need to do was her best on the battlefield that would lay before her. You two all ready to head off then? Falk asked as he stood with them at the minigate, preparing to leave town as well for a bit. Yep, Thera told her uncle brightly, trying to be optimistic about things in complete contrast to Ben, who was groaning beside her. No, I'm already envisioning things going horribly wrong. There were still a couple weeks before the invasion points opened up, but given that he and Thera would be going to a number of them, they were leaving a bit early to get the lay of the places to see where they'd be fighting and how they'd be of the most use they could, something he wasn't remotely looking forward to. He could already see it being an outrageous amount of work that he wanted no part of, as he once more wondered just what in his skill set made him think doing that was going to be a good idea. No chance. It's fine. I'm going to complain, but I'll put up with it, and who knows? Maybe I'll even survive the ordeal. His teacher just patted his shoulder, understanding the feelings Ben was going through. Just do your best, both of you. And remember, when things get started, if it looks like they're going to go wrong, just run away. Uncle, we can't do that. Sure you can, the Yeti shrugged. If it gets to the point that that's your only option, then it's better to live and fight another day. You got it, Falk, Ben told him, suddenly a lot brighter after getting that little piece of advice from his teacher. We'll flee at the first sign of danger. Seeing as how the first sign of danger is going to be the points opening up, at least try to tough it out for a little while. Fine, don't mind me, we'll do our best and come out on top. And you? Off to see our beautiful superweapon. MMH, gotta give it one last look to be sure. Even if it got me my 3rd tier, this is my last chance to try and fix it up if need be, so since I won't be seeing you both for a while, make sure you survive. We'll both be fine, Uncle, Thera told him, trying to reassure him with the bit of worry he was doing his best to hide from his face. I'm one of the most powerful mages on the planet. Nothing's killing me or Ben while I'm around to say anything about it. Ha, good. In that case, I'll see you both sometime after the points close. They parted with that, the two going off to their first location, a city neither of them had visited before but had been chosen as an evacuation point for the injured by virtue of its size, the presence of a gate, and the lack of any nearby invasion points to complicate things. As they went to the large building waiting just outside of the network that had already been set up to be as obviously a hospital as possible for anyone coming through who might not be familiar with the area, going in to talk to a waiting receptionist who was there helping to guide some of the ongoing setup. Hello there, Thera greeted, her card already at the ready with the relevant information displayed. I've come to look at the area I'll be working. I was told I was expected. Ah, Thera, yes, right this way, he responded professionally, not acting in any shock to have an awakened skill holder before him before he got up and led the two down the halls, off to the director of the place to handle them from there. Stolen from its original source, this story is not meant to be on Amazon. Report any sightings. That very director gave a polite bow and a tired smile, clearly exhausted from who could guess how much work leading up to that point as she took over. Welcome, It's a pleasure to have you here. It's not going to be the most complicated, but I'll show you around. She led the two from there to a different area. Going back down the hall, they'd already walked to a large open area only a little past the entrance. More beds and mats already shoved in there to prepare for what was sure to be a flood of coming patients in only a matter of days, as the director went on to talk. We'll be doing our best to arrange things by order of severity, so anytime you arrive, just head straight to the first zone over there. Don't worry about getting in the way of anyone. I'll be managing that section myself, so if you have any issues you can just let me know, but otherwise feel free to use your own judgment to get started on those you see. As for those strange gates you'll be making use of, well, they're just behind those two doors. We'll have them open when things actually start, but for the moment we're keeping them closed since they're drawing too many eyes and curiosity from people who should instead be working. Infinite hells. We've already had one complaint from someone wandering through to a fort beyond, which was a whole thing. She trailed off from there, even if it seemed like she wanted to complain more as Thera spoke up. All right, we'll just need to use them to inspect the various other points we'll be working between then, and we'll get out of your hair. That's fine. Just let me show you one last thing. She led them down a side hall after that, showing them another room that was filled with bunks stretching to the ceiling. Not a setup that would make for any convenient acts of healing, but instead serving another purpose. Where you both can rest between everything, she explained. Just take a couple beds in whatever downtime you get amongst everything else you'll be doing, since it seems you'll be particularly busy. It looked like it was going to be a largely miserable experience, but at least once they were going to be stuck there, it would be a place to rest as everything went on, even if sleep was going to be a precious commodity as the battle started and progressed. On the plus side, Thera's up to her second level of sleep resistance, so she might manage okay. Except the skill is mostly for staying up, isn't it? At the very least, I haven't seen it do a crazy job with helping her wake up, but maybe that's just another couple levels for any noticeable difference. Either way, I can wake up so I can wake her up, it will be fine. He could see that she wasn't looking forward to it either. But then, there was nothing to be excited about given what was to come. What mattered was that their accommodations were set, and from there they said goodbye to the director for the time being, going from there to the 13 gates waiting for them, jumping through to what waited beyond. Behind the first gate they went to was something they'd already expected well enough. A fortress, same as some of the ones they had seen scattered around Craftsman's Tower during the first wave, had been constructed when the invasion points had been marked, with more surrounding it sure to be off in the distance but not currently visible due to the high walls blocking the view, with the main thing they had to notice being the person waiting for them. Thera, I take it? The individual asked, getting a nod. Yes. Plus her tag-along, Ben added, getting him a look but nothing else as the person went on. All right, both of you with me, and I'll show you where to stand for your time here. They were led up a staircase immediately in front of them and shown where they could stand along the edge of the wall, giving them a vantage point to attack from where other mages and archers would be positioned as well. We'll have our warriors doing what they can from outside the wall, so just make sure you aim farther out when this starts. I've been told you're powerful. Just try not to catch anyone in your crossfire if you can help it, unless there's an emergency great enough for the situation to call for it. Understood. You don't need to worry about that, Thera told him, already thinking about what she'd be able to do from that position with her magics. I'll be able to manage things fine. Another nod, and with it came an end to that very short tour, with her having seen the only place she was expected to be, while Ben had no expectations placed on him beyond what any other mage would deal with, letting the two of them go back through the gate to explore the rest, finding where they'd be working in each one and getting a lay of each area in preparation for a day that drew ever closer. Inside the library, reading through the first floor of the main building in a flash thanks to having so many more clones to use, his main body was focused elsewhere beyond just providing the mana for lifting the swath of books and turning pages, instead focusing on the crystal sheet he held in his hands, making and breaking dense enchantments across it at high speeds. Not just simple constructs, these enchantments were chosen specifically to give him as much experience as he could get for his current job of summoned enchanter, with the focus of what he kept making and breaking being built on his experience as someone summoned from another world. Like he'd done in the past, what he was making now were video games, even if there was no video aspect to them, as he instead used complex arrangements of mana to recreate games he'd seen or played from his old world, as well as making new ones himself, building them each at a level that made him wonder how much anyone else would struggle to replicate them. Since he was using the enchanting modifier liberally, anyone who wanted to replicate his work would need to be an awakened enchanter at the very least, and since it was built using his personal system, having access to multiple minds was a must as well, leading to end results that couldn't be argued against. He hadn't actually expected it himself when he'd started out, but many of the enchantments he'd constructed were enough to push the simple sheet to the lower end of legendary, as he created things better than what could be found on Earth. With what he was creating using light enchantments resulting in photorealistic visuals for anyone that would play along with vast, complex game paths filled with options to choose from and explore. The sheer scope he was aiming for with everything made it an intense level of work that was constantly threatening to break the crystal it was placed on each time, with his level of skill being the only thing keeping it whole before he'd go on to break down what he'd worked so hard to create, making something new in its place. It was something he wanted to do his best with, even as he was poring over thousands of texts, eventually finishing that last floor of the building. Done that. And done that too, perfect. Down to only a week left before the wave was going to start. Ben had wanted to get his next job before he stepped foot onto the battlefield, with what he was going to take already firmly in his mind as he touched his job crystal, seeing the options stretched out before him in his thoughts. And with no new ones to tempt me, it looks like I'll be going with the original plan and taking my last major crafting job. Give me Destructive Craftsman. No levels, which kind of sucks, but Extraction Enhancement, huh? I'd thought that was an affinitied skill, but I guess there just aren't enough people with a non-affinitied magic who could make use of it, given that I'm probably the only person on the planet who has material manipulation, which means the only others who'd be able to pull it off would be the non-affinity mages. Neat, I'll need to report this later. The story has been taken without consent. If you see it on Amazon, report the incident. Like most enhancement skills, it was as a passive ability with a rather handy effect for him, not only raising his skill when it came to an aspect of his magic, making him better at extracting one material from another with it, but also helped to lower the mana cost of the act with each level, something he wasn't going to turn his nose up at, even if he had let him feel a small bit of hope that he'd get something a bit more useful. A level to any of his core skills, or maybe even an awakening for one of his 9th level ones. He had been told in the past that a job change could be enough to prompt it after all, but he'd had yet to see such a thing himself, even with the ridiculous pile of bonuses he had gone to everything thanks to his various jobs, titles, and blessings. Or I'd take an enhancement skill for my materialization. I haven't heard of anything like that existing, but I'm pretty comfortable saying that it should and I deserve it. The only people on this planet who are likely to do it more than me are a couple of the great spirits, and I'm pretty sure I technically have more range than any of them, even if I can only put out a lower volume. Just saying, it would be appreciated. He didn't know why he was even trying to bargain with the system when he already knew that the skills he gained had more to do with talents and compatibility already forming within his soul, but he still dared to hope he'd get something like that one day. After all, if he couldn't be described as talented or compatible with materialization, then nobody could be. Although, admittedly, taking a job called Destructive Craftsman and hoping that would end up with me getting something that would help with creation is kind of unreasonable. In that sense, Extraction Enhancement fits a lot better. Basically breaking something into its composite parts. He materialized a bit of bronze as he thought it before using his mana to rip it into its component copper and tin before remerging it again and repeating the process as a form of practice, feeling done with his enchanting now that his job was complete as he put the crystal into his ring for later. Content to keep practicing his new skill, and with the last floor he needed to read through in the main building complete, Ben took his clones and led them through the main branch one last time, wanting to see if there were any books he'd missed on any of the higher floors, either due to someone else having been reading them when he'd first gone through or else because they'd only just been added without him knowing to take a look, with the short walk leaving him with a couple dozen new books in his head by the time he'd made it to the top, finding a familiar face sitting to the side. "Hey Verbum," Ben greeted, with the other man jumping when he saw him. "Rotten Earth? Why are there more of you?" "Because it's handy for getting my work done. Anyway, how's it going?" "Well, like everyone else, I'm preparing to die, so I'd say not good." "So what do you want this time?" "Me? Nothing. I just figured I'd say hi while I'm here. See how you're doing is all." The answer surprised him given that Ben usually came when he wanted an explanation for something that had appeared on his status, but it let him relax a little, leading to a small question. So are you going to be fighting at one of the points? A dozen points. You know Thera's crazy powerful, so I'm tagging along as she goes everywhere to give what help I can. You, staying here. Killy's going to be using me for whatever info she can, and using it to adjust any plans on the fly. It's not like I'd be any help fighting anyway. Fair enough, glad you'll be safe at least. If I live, I'll stop by to say hi later. Again Verbum was quiet, slipping into his thoughts until Ben was prepared to go to another building. Try and keep safe. You got it, buddy. Don't worry. This isn't going to be the death of Ben no matter how negative I am. If only I could actually make myself believe that. Still, he knew he could be a pessimist as far as the invasion was concerned. He fully believed he was justified in that, but enough people around him were doing their best to hope for the future. He could at least pretend to do the same to keep from making it any worse. With Verbum giving an appreciative nod, not believing the optimism either but still appreciating it, Ben went off to the next building to read, working away the rest of his day. Well, at least I managed to get one more level. Ben sighed as he let himself collapse to the ground. Sure freaking cut it close though. What matters is that you got it, Myriad told him, trying to be positive despite only having a day until the invasion points opened. So what now? Now I spend the rest of my time pretending I'm not going to die in the next few weeks. That's not a completely unrealistic expectation, right? Ben, even if you don't seem to accept it yourself, you are one of the most powerful people on this planet at this point, and having such a high level of an awakened magic is only going to help. I'm sure you'll survive this wave. You're being optimistic. This is going to be a chaotic battle with an uncountable horde of enemies coming through. It doesn't matter how powerful anyone is. Anything can happen and anything can go wrong. Plus the minor issue that these are going to be the intelligent ones, that creates a lot more room for things to go sideways real fast. His god was silent in the face of Ben's pessimism, leaving the apostle to sign. It's not like I'm giving up, so don't worry. No matter how bad things get, I'm not going to just roll over and die. No matter how I'm cut, stabbed, sliced, burned, dismembered, or any number of other terrible things, I'll struggle till the end. You better. I want you living to the end and enjoying your happily ever after. Ha! I'll do my best. It's just surviving this 1 month. And then every other month until the third wave, seeing as how the world's about to be flooded by demons. And then I guess 1 more month after where we'll be dealing with the worst of the worst. And then whatever's left on this planet till the end of time. And that's really only if we don't get any more waves, because the group optimism about that on this planet is frankly ridiculous. Never mind. I think I just talked myself out of that faint glimmer of hope. It was nice to experience for the second it lasted though. I'll remember it fondly as I'm bleeding out. And here I was, so hopeful that some optimism had managed to sneak its way into you. What can I say? I'll just have to enjoy the few hours I have left. He actualized when he said it, creating a feast for himself to eat with his god joining in, taking in the new flavors as they talked. Then enough worrying on the present, focus on the future. What do you intend to do once this wave ends? That really feels like the sort of thing I should save thinking about for the future. If you come across this story on Amazon, it's taken without permission from the author. Report it. What future? Myriad asked. Do you think you're going to have the leeway to consider it any time the wave is going on? Yes? No matter how intense it is, I'm absolutely going to have a few minds free at any given time, and I'm still popping up here when I sleep, even if you're going to be off somewhere else. Why wouldn't I have time for it? True. He might have been the only person going to the front lines who would have the mental leeway for anything, but the question still made him think, and it wasn't like it would hurt to consider ahead of time. I mean, I'm assuming that at least for the first week after, Thera's going to be busy helping at the clinics, and from there she's probably going to be hunting demons constantly. But as for me, I don't know what I'll do. I'll help with anything that gets close enough to Stonewall that might cause problems while she's away, but as for anything else, I mean, what can I even do, man? I make things, I'll keep making things, as simple as that. Who knows, maybe if I keep getting a few levels, I'll be able to make something that could deal some serious damage in the third wave. I'm beginning to make it to middle legendary sometimes now. Getting a few high legendary isn't too unreasonable to hope for. For anyone else it would be. Sucks to be anyone else then. His god sighed. Well, I suppose as far as Barebones' plans go, there's plenty worse. Just do your best to play to your strengths and I'll just hope for the best. That's the spirit. Waking up after his talk with Myriad, Ben prepared the best breakfast he could while using up the various ingredients filling the place, not wanting them to rot while everyone was away. Sonia had her own location to go to, serving at a different hospital than Thera, since keeping 2 awakened healers in one place was sure to be nothing but a waste, and all of them were going to be leaving early. But for the time they had, he at least wanted to make the most of it, faking his positivity as the 2 slowly woke up and serving a meal to both of them, trying to hide his opinions about the future. So, you guys have any plans until we head off later? He asked them as they ate. All of them would be going to see Pelania and Abris for one last meal together before the points opened, just as they had during the first wave, but they had hours until then to spend, with him personally having no plans. Sure, he could have gone to the shop for whatever extra practice he could get, but on the last day, what was the point? Maybe spending the day working would give him some extra experience for his current job. Maybe it would even be enough for him to gain another level to any of his core skills, but none of that particularly mattered. The only skill he could train in the shop that would have any use on the battlefield was his magic, and he doubted that last day of work would be enough to give him that little extra edge. If it would have been enough, then he'd get the same after a day or 2 of actual fighting. No need to sacrifice his last day of peace on it. I'll be going to the clinic for an hour, Sonia told them. I'll clear out whoever's there and then I'm coming right back. Drari knows I'll be leaving tomorrow. I'm not going to spend the day working when there's plenty of staff staying behind. And I'm staying in, Thera added. I've done all I can for the surrounding communities. This is going to be my last day to rest. Good choice. I'll be here too, so we'll have to do something entertaining. And it just so happens I've got enchantments for 1,000 new games in my head. Well then, I guess we can have some fun until dinner, she told him with a smile. Just try not to be too bad at the stuff you've made. No promises. Early the next day, all of them went out, with Ben and Thera heading to their point while Sonia went to hers, wishing each other the best as they parted. The 2 weren't going to be beginning at the hospital that made up the center of that miniature gate network, given the fact that there were not yet victims that needed to be healed, instead going to the first of the gates, standing along the wall where they'd been told to before as a flurry of movement went on all around them, with people getting in positions and arranging things the best they could, or else just shuffling under the stress as the countdown went on with a flare going up in the sky. An hour to go, Ben muttered when he saw it. Flashes of the first wave and everything leading up to it making it across his thoughts as Thera took his hand beside him. It will be fine. We'll survive this and I'll protect you if things get bad. Don't worry and focus on protecting yourself. I'll manage somehow. It's not like I'm going to be down there, at least. He looked over the edge they were waiting on to the warriors below, the ones whose skills were trained for direct combat instead of anything that could be used at a distance like so many magics, but meant they'd be facing the horde in a significantly less secure way compared to them, being within reach of tooth and claw right from the get-go. And all of the clouds don't exactly help, do they? It's not exactly too dark to see, but a little more light wouldn't hurt. Oh well, not like it's going to harm anything either. At the very least, his vision wasn't obstructed as he turned his eyes up to the point off in the distance, marking just where all hell was going to break loose. A part of him that wasn't suffering under the reality of the situation couldn't help but wonder how it worked as he stared, and given that line of thought felt a bit more enjoyable than the efforts he was putting towards trying to avoid falling into despair. He let himself indulge in it, just for a moment as his head filled with possibilities. It surely wasn't a piece of magical technology, if only because the demons didn't seem to dabble in such things if the few examples he'd seen were any evidence. Though as he thought it, he had to admit to himself that the small handful of demon technology and enchantments making their way to his eyes was too little to let him judge a galactic civilization, even if he felt sure of himself. But if that wasn't the case, then what? Considering that demons were a terrestrial race, born to a planet like all of those they invaded instead of being free to travel the void like some others in the universe, that meant they had to have had an origin point, and his thoughts considered the species from that angle. He knew they could become powerful if given the time to grow and seemed to be able to act together to an extent, though from his few experiences in the past, that may have been due to having a powerful leader acting above them. But did that translate into them being able to form cooperative relationships and work towards a common goal? From what Ben had seen any time he peeked into one's mind, he was sure the answer was no. They could be dominated by those above them, but a desire to kill and dominate in return was too powerful for him to bet on more than a handful across any planet being able to put aside their differences and ignore their base nature to improve. That meant what he was seeing wasn't the product of some powerful ritual. He doubted the species was even aware of that application of magic, and even if they were, wouldn't have the ability to use it on such a scale unless a more powerful demon held such dominion over them that they had no choice but to learn such an outrageously powerful spell that somehow stretched across worlds and keep it up constantly until it was opened for those on the other side to flood through. He didn't believe the race had the restraint to keep from just leaving it open either. If you come across this story on Amazon, be aware that it has been stolen from Royal Road. Please report it. Even if I still don't understand why they do it this way. It was a mystery he was sure he'd never get an answer to while he kept up his thoughts. If it wasn't the race itself who was doing it, then it made a lot more sense to question if it fell under the domain of the demon's gods. He didn't have much context for how powerful any of the gods of his current world had been at their peak. All of them sharing a single planet meant there was only so much faith to go around, even if other benefits made it worth it. But could a space god manage such a thing if a planet worth of faith was being directed at them? Maybe it didn't even need to be as extreme as invading across the galaxy right off the bat. He knew the home star system of the various elven races had held a variety of habitable planets. Perhaps a space god could invade those nearby ones, letting them fill up with new believers for all the faith that would come with it before stretching out to other nearby stars, slowly gaining enough power with each new invasion until distance ceased to be a limiting factor. That was certainly an idea he couldn't help but think had potential as an explanation for where the power to cross such vast gulfs of reality was coming from, and he put it at the top of his list in terms of probability. But another idea couldn't help strike him as well, no matter how less likely. The summoning spell and the mystery spell, two constructs of magic whose creation and creators were lost to time, with at least one of which had been able to demonstrate an insane level of power by allowing the gods of this reality to tear into another for all of the benefits that would come with that in terms of the souls they might harvest. While he couldn't say for sure what the second one did yet, he didn't doubt that it would be similarly impressive in terms of power, and while the little bit he had been able to glean from it didn't make him think it could be the one allowing for such interstellar travel, that didn't mean the gods of the invaders hadn't somehow gotten their hands upon a third. A different spell constructed for traveling between the stars themselves. Given the power he knew the first spell had and the implications that held for the strength of the civilization that created it, it wouldn't be surprising if they had at one point dominated the galaxy or even the universe, especially since the two original spells hadn't seemed like they'd been found in the same area. Was it so hard to imagine that another had been lying around somewhere, maybe even laying on the rock that the coming demons had emerged from, left and forgotten there before life had even arisen? It was a question he wasn't going to get an answer to either, with so much information about the demons hidden from him, but it was a thought that left him a certain level of longing. If that had been the case, then it might have been the sort of thing that would contain even more mana modifiers, something he simply didn't have the time to try and discover for himself. That would be the work of years, decades, and maybe beyond. He could easily envision such a task taking up centuries of study, slowly trying to find more and more despite the growing difficulties in figuring out new ones as their pool of options increased. But rather than think about that when I definitely don't have the time to worry about finding new mana modifiers for me to use, let's ask a different question. How would I personally construct an interstellar gate network? He'd already severely reduced the size of the enchantment needed for the planet's current network. The question just became one of how he would make it strong enough to reach across the stars. For starters, having the enchantment modifier already made a significant difference given that his initial progress had all come before he'd gotten it, and he was sure that the way he'd incorporated it already wasn't showing its full potential compared to what he might be able to manage with a bit more thought and experimentation, and he continued to consider it from there. He did want to start experimenting with adding the modifiers he was aware of to his enchantments for whatever effects they would show, and he already had some ideas that might bear fruit if they worked, and when he looked at how small the current gate enchantments he was creating were, there was plenty of room to enlarge them. Actually, I'd need to double-check the distance with Quillith, but I think if I'm right about what I could currently create and I covered something the size of a standard gate, I'd be able to make something that would be able to reach the nearest stars. Interesting. And from there, to make something that would cover the entire galaxy. Looking at his improvements with each level he gained and considering how he might continue to improve, it was enough to give him an estimate to work off of. Past the 9th level of divine enchanting and deep connection, but maybe not by much. I don't actually know for sure how much I'd grow if I ever managed to awaken the skills, but that should in theory be what I'd need. Interesting. It may have been an idea he'd never get the chance to pay off, but at the very least it was an interesting project to mull over, devoting plenty of his minds to it while the rest of him chatted with Thera until the 10-minute flare went up. Dang, they cut it pretty close getting these to us, Ben said as he looked over and sniffed the same bar of food they'd gotten during the first wave, made by the divine chef and imparting incredible buffs even to someone like him who didn't have the sort of constitution to let him enjoy them to the same extent as so many others. At least we got them at all, Thera said with a shrug, about to eat hers but watching as Ben slipped his into his ring. Not going to have it right now? Saving it for a special occasion, he told her as he instead took out and downed one of his mana regeneration potions. This should do for now. After having experienced its effects during the first wave, he'd decided it was the sort of thing that would be best saved for a low point, with Thera following his lead after hesitating a second. Just don't go trying to make me take yours if things look bad, she warned, getting a smile for her efforts. Would I do that sort of thing? Yes. Okay, well I won't this time. Anyway, what do you think the odds are that Falk could get me a meeting with the Divine Chef now that he's at the 3rd tier? He could probably set up a meeting for me, right? Maybe score me a snack or two too. He'd be happy to get any scrap she cooked, if only because that meant he'd be able to replicate it with his actualization in Myriad's realm to enjoy at his leisure. But Thera just shook her head. I feel like your odds would have been best asking before this wave. There's no way she's going to have time to entertain you after, even if it's only for a few minutes. Lame but likely correct. Ugh, okay, now I'm fully motivated for this world to win. We'll do everything we can to make it happen. Please be fully motivated about that because of your own survival, not your stomach. He grinned as she sighed, having lightened the mood just a bit before the final flare went up, telling them there was only a minute left as he couldn't help but take her free hand as part of him counted down. All of the mages around were holding out their staves, already preparing to cast as he wondered if he should have made himself the same before ultimately shaking his head. He'd had the glove he'd made himself in the Dead God's trial to channel his mana through, but hadn't even really felt the need to use that after awakening his magic. His control was simply too good at that point to require an additional aid, and he couldn't imagine a proper staff making too much of a difference for him when it was something he wasn't used to. If anything, he was more likely to fumble with it unless he'd take a couple days to practice first. Even if not for everyone, the way he did things is what suited him most in the end. 40 seconds. He could feel the potion taking effect as he casually burned some of his mana, manipulating a piece of stone in his pocket by breaking it into its composite parts and remaking it before letting his mind linger on some of what filled his spatial ring. If you come across this story on Amazon, it's taken without permission from the author. Report it. Amongst the food and potions, it was filled with something else, tens of thousands of iron ball bearings, ready to be taken out as needed and making up how he would be attacking as he pulled out his first handful to prepare, feeling their weight in his grip and giving him a surprising amount of comfort given what was to come, the feeling of something strong and sturdy that he knew he'd be able to kill with giving him something to focus on within his grasp, even if he was going to have used them all up before the first day was done. That meant he'd need to make more when it came time to get their bit of rest, meaning he'd be stealing some of Thera's mana while she slept to materialize what he'd need and might even end up doing so during the battle that day as it went on depending on the way things turned out. With the potions he'd given her though, combined with her vast supply, he wasn't too worried about the strain that might place on her in the end. She wouldn't be materializing left and right like she'd had to when the outsider attacked, meaning that if things went well she'd have plenty to spare. And not just for me from the looks of it. With his sacrilege, he could see the faith within everyone, including the various spirits that filled the air around her, all ready to do their part in what was to come and taking advantage of her ambient mana, while they still could, and given the lack of awakened skills among the mages who stood nearby with them, he could easily predict a future where he'd need to transfer some of Thera's massive supply over if they got too low to let them keep fighting. While ordinarily it wouldn't make sense to take the mana of a more powerful mage to give to a weaker mage, Thera's quantity allowed that to be a viable option. 20 seconds. Even reaching out early to poke into the minds of those around them, Ben felt a variety of things. Fear, an ocean of it coming from people as they all did their own little countdowns with varying degrees of accuracy, with everyone afraid of what was to come. False hope too, with more than a few wanting to believe they'd get a repeat of the last wave, that something would happen to cause enough terror among the demons that they'd want to close the gates early again, giving them just a little more peace compared to what any of their lost worlds would have been dealing with in that same time. It was a hope all of them would be losing soon enough. The conditions that had allowed for that sort of thing to happen wouldn't repeat. There was always the chance that Naloth, the high elf who'd caused the disaster that was opening the gate to hell, would show up somewhere to display whatever strength he might have gained from his mad ritual. It would be better than just hiding away with the power he'd risked the world for. But even then, he wouldn't be able to make a difference that large. No, be it days or weeks, they'd be losing what tiny bits of hope they held, forced to accept the reality of it all. They were in a good position thanks to the events of the first wave despite what it had cost. They'd need to accept that was the only advantage they'd get and use it for all it was worth. The planet hadn't been devastated as they waited for the first wave, and the death toll was small at the moment. Those extra bodies would just need to put in the work they could. 10 seconds. Oh, damn it! Thera muttered before giving into something she'd been avoiding. Pulling away her hand from Ben's and pulling a metal circle from her ring to shove on her head at the last moment, looking like she absolutely hated the experience of putting it on as her mind split and the speed of her thoughts and learning sped up. Your circlets are absolutely the worst, and I wish you didn't pack them. Ah, but since I did, you had no choice. Obviously, I can't just not use something so useful right now. Her absolute displeasure so close to the gate opening left him wanting to laugh at the sheer, ridiculous contrast of it all, but he never got the chance. Before he got even one more word out, his countdown had finished, showing how true his timekeeping kept up with the interstellar gate opened, ushering in the second wave. In the same way as the first wave, demons flooded out the open portal, their mad rush for blood hiding any of the supposed sapience they'd be coming with as they poured out from all angles to inflict death and destruction upon the world, setting off the various traps that had been placed and overwhelming them with sheer mass, with the ones at the front having no choice but to accept it when the only alternative was to be crushed by the horde behind them. And as they rushed outwards, groups of warriors moved forward to meet them, facing the charge with the powers they'd been refining to strike back with all they had as the two forces clashed. The difference in bodies meaning it should have been a bloodbath if the demons didn't have a different goal on top of killing everyone around. Spreading outward. For even if they killed every combatant who was waiting for them, they still sought to go out farther and find more, meaning those who had come were just a blip in comparison to the entire planet before them, something to get through or past as they gave rise to their pandemonium and inflicted it on the planet as the clash began. Compared to them, though, the various warriors across the world's armies had the benefits that came with structure and planning, using their formations to keep from collapsing against all that came as they slayed everything they could, piling up corpses around them while the cloudy sky above began to move. Along with everything attacking on the surface, the sky was also filling up with the winged demons and other flyers that made their way out, with the gods finally showing some worth as there and across the world. Lightning rained down, striking everything it could reach as bodies fell from the sky, giving Ben no choice but to acknowledge that the ones they were giving their faith were in fact putting in some work of their own amidst it all while Thera started to act. The demons were still too far out for most mages, but not her as she used her unaffinitied power to create constructs of mana to fire out into the swarm, not needing to aim beyond making sure she shot past the warriors and being guaranteed to hit something given the sheer scale of it all as the corpses she'd created were trampled over without a second thought, being crushed by their brethren in their urge to move. Seconds after she started, the range had shrunk enough that others there could attack too, Ben included as he casually viewed the battlefield and opened his hand, firing off the dozens of bullets he held into the crowd, his mental structure taking in everything he saw and letting his pick the path each shot would follow as he downed hundreds of demons, each shot passing through multiple bodies after he predicted how the horde before him would need to move. Which is what I was looking for. This sort of destruction has to be applicable to my current job given its name and combined with the fact the demons are going to give me experience I should have it done before the month ends, but I made a pretty obvious mistake. He thought with a sigh. Why was I being thrifty with my void stone? I should have turned every single piece of it into rings and bracelets and filled it all up with bullets the moment I discovered how to use it and either reclaimed more later or else just made Jake help me make more. A stupid mistake. If I'd just done that, I could have had enough to last me a good chunk of the month. As things are, I won't even have enough for the day. If I live, I'm going to have to try and not do anything that dumb again. As he was chastising himself, he was already pulling more bullets from his ring and firing them off, shooting them by the handful each time as he trusted his observations to properly judge where to hit, being rewarded with untold levels of death with each of his attacks. A case of theft. This story is not rightfully on Amazon. If you spot it, report the violation. It was like that the battle went on as the hours passed, piling up bodies around and still seeing no end to their work for the effort, even as the effects on their own side were beginning to show amongst the minds he was closest to. Fear, panic, stress, and despair of all sorts were already building up from it all as everyone felt the strain. This was going to be an unending attack lasting weeks, creating a mountain of bodies while still ending with an uncountable volume of monsters making it into the world, making it clear why so few worlds ever made it to the third wave. There was nothing that could be done but to continue fighting, but as it went on, Ben did what he could to ease the burdens on those around him, taking those nearby into his head for fractions of a second but letting it feel like an hour as they at first panicked about the mind effect until eventually accepting the peace for what it was. A needed break. It did nothing for the strain on their bodies, but it gave them a brief respite, putting them all into a better position to keep going by the time he eventually did the same for Thera, seeing her blink in surprise for a second before her mental form slumped over. I'm not going to collapse to the ground while we do this, right? Not for the length of time I'll have you in here. At worst, you'll feel slightly unsteady by the time I let you go. Good, because I needed the break. When we're going to sleep for whatever rest we can get, I think I'm going to ask you to make one of these circlets with just the thought speed aspect. Even if I can't actually rest that long, it would be nice to feel like I'm getting a bit more than I am. You got it. And how's your mana holding up? Fine, even with all of this I barely feel it. I think the potion's helping a lot. Just as important, how are you handling all of this? You don't really get to escape. Unlike the people he was pulling into his head, Ben was only devoting a fraction of his focus to them. Everything else was still observing the battle. Even as they spoke, he was midway through firing his next attack to reap what devastation he could. I'm managing fine, he said with a shrug. Despite it all, he really was having no issue with keeping up, at least for the time. The way he thought made this just one thing among many he could be doing. The only real issue is that I'm going to need to replenish my bullets soon. But, hold on. Looks like I'll have a solution to that which doesn't involve stealing your mana in a second. She gave him a look and he explained exactly what he had in mind, still having perceived minutes to spare between the two of them before he released her from his thoughts, leaving her perfectly appraised to what was about to happen as one of the demons with access to a decent level of air magic chose to throw itself up the wall instead of going around like so many others, having made the mistake of choosing to go directly in front of the two of them to do it. In that same second, Thera had captured it with her magic, smashing it against the fort's edge and destroying its brain in a way that couldn't be undone no matter what other magics or skills it held, letting Ben get his hands on it as he applied his newest skill, extraction the corpse's moisture at once and leaving a shriveled husk in exchange. After the level came the next part of fixing his supply of shots as Ben pulsed his mana through the dried-out husk, reducing to nothing but pebbles that he shaped into spheres and brought into his ring, ready to be used for his future attacks. They won't be as good as some metal bullets, but they'll do for the time being, and instead of stealing any of Thera's power for myself, just gonna distribute it. He transferred what he could to the people around them from there, doing his best to make the experience as comfortable as possible amidst everything else to let them carry on their own attacks without needing as many breaks to recuperate, all while Ben continued on his flurry, using that one demon to kill thousands as the day wore on. The day was long, as was the night with it. By the time they needed to go to the hospital, there were already people being carried through the minigate to receive treatment. having been brought into the relative safety of the fortress as others kept the demons from slipping through, and once they got in, Thera was immediately swarmed with tasks. She was the awakened healer of that location, something that most hospitals across the planet weren't going to be lucky enough to have. But that meant she was also in the position to do the most, and with the effort she put in she was showing it, doing her best to empty the location out, even with more patients constantly flooding in. It was an impossible task, even with others around to help her. But she did all she was able to as the hours wore on, making what difference she could before she needed to rest. By the time she'd made it to the beds, Ben had already been there for a while, having nothing more he could do, and instead spent the time he had materializing more bullets for himself, stealing bits of mana from the surrounding sleeping healers when he was sure they'd have enough time to rest and replenish their reserves to fill up his ring, and making a spatial bag from there to fill even more, trying to make up for his previous mistake as hours were spent creating bullets. When they were reunited, without a word she leaned down to give him a brief kiss, and he handed off the requested circlet, watching her choose to take the small amount of space beside him rather than one of the free bunks before she slipped it on and immediately nodded off, at least getting what mental benefits would come from having her sleep prolonged, even if she wouldn't get to enjoy any physical ones. And with her out, Ben suddenly had a far greater source of mana to take, creating his bullets in the sort of volume that would last him days until he finally went to sleep. When he got to Myriad's realm for the night, he found himself unusually alone, something his god had already warned him about, but still felt strange as he did what little he could for his mental health as he sat back, created a nice meal to snack on, and did his absolute best to try not to think. This is a waste of time. That resolution had lasted him all of a few minutes as he instead began looking at what he could do while he was up there, free of distractions. The story has been taken without consent. If you see it on Amazon, report the incident. He immediately started actualizing, creating plates he could throw and bullets to then shoot out for what little experience it would give both his aim and his marksmanship, but with how little the mental load that was, he used the time to think on other things as well, looking at all he'd seen and trying to imagine what he could do better as he played back all he'd witnessed that day in his head, trying to imagine how he'd improve. I can see a lot of times that I could have used slightly different shots to kill more demons at once. He judged as he looked over what he'd done. The issue is with how I predicted they'd move in certain situations, but here I am with all the time in the world. Let's try and model the way I saw them reacting and see if that lets me get more killed tomorrow. As living things, he wouldn't be able to perfectly guess how they would react to a given situation, but he didn't need to be perfect, only better than he had been. Against the Horde, missing a few dozen potential targets compared to all he'd killed was realistically nothing, but at the same time it was dozens of more monsters let loose onto the world, either to become another warrior's problem as they slayed them on the battlefield, or else the problem of whatever innocent life they encountered as they made their way through the world. It wasn't some game of numbers where something could be good enough, he needed to kill all he could. And killing all I can does also mean a buttload of experience, so I should probably consider what I'm going to take for my next job before it gets to that point, so I'm not wasting milliseconds deciding on the battlefield. Let's see, if I complete this one before the 3rd week mark, I'll take High Tank, just for any benefits that might give my defensive skills and vitality, and if I don't finish till after the 3rd week, I'll take Connect Master. It would be good to have a few bonuses that high going specifically to Deep Connection. Wouldn't turn my nose up at a level either, or a new skill, even if I have no clue what sort of skill a Connect-themed job could possibly give me. He was slipping into some idle musing as he did everything else, but it helped relax him, so he gave himself a pass. A part of him wanted to smile at the idea that he couldn't help but be a downer leading into the wave while thinking about whatever silly thought entered his head now that it had started. But it wasn't something he could help. He couldn't be constantly positive when it felt like his death was fast approaching, but now that it might have been right at his doorstep, he couldn't keep his mind from wandering either. No matter how bad things got, he needed to live while he still carried his pulse, with how he lived, speaking of who he was. But I can only do this for so long too, until I need something else, so for the time being, he actualized again, bringing forth 2 spells, both the summoning and mystery one, and looked them both over. He had a few hours of real time until he needed to wake up, and under the power of his unnatural thoughts, that might as well have been weeks or months. With all of that at his disposal, there was no reason not to make the most of it before he had to go face hell again. The following morning brought them to their next location, with those around them who hadn't yet been able to trade out for whatever brief bits of rest they'd be allowed looking the worst for it by the time they took their positions. In the span of a day, everyone had been exposed to more violence and death than anyone should see in a lifetime, and as the two took their positions to contribute to it, Ben once more provided what relief he could, pulling those it was safe to into him mind for the chance to safely unwind amidst it all, chatting with them as he did. There wasn't one person who didn't know what was coming. They'd all seen it in the first wave after all, but it still wore on them as they fell back on talking about what mattered and motivated them. Family and friends who didn't have the skill or the strength to fight or who were staying behind in their cities and villages to deal with whatever was certain to slip past the defensive fortresses that dotted the lands, all to destroy what was there as they conquered the world. It didn't let any of them feel a drop of peace, with many who'd been holding on to hope that things would go as well as the first wave did already felt it fading. But through it all, Ben tried to reassure them, no matter how little he believed it himself. "We'll get through this," he'd say confidently to each one before releasing them from his mind. "The planet hasn't been preparing for so long for nothing, and we have the gods doing their best too. Once we overcome these trials, then we'll be able to move on and rebuild. We all just have to do our best till them." Hollow words, but they seemed to help, with those being spoken to ending up appreciative of the effort, while the work the heavens were showing gave a boost as well. There were clouds hanging in the air around that gate too. He was sure that was going to be true of all of them, with lightning continuing to rain down on them all, lighting up the area with constant flashes as each strike down demons, leaving their flying foes to crash down to the ground below, causing more damage to those unlucky enough to be hit from above. As he took it all in, he spared some attention for Thera as well, slipping into her mind when it wasn't immediately apparent what she was doing. There were no obvious attacks being fired off from her staff, but that was because she was directing her mana farther out, altering the density of the ground itself to leave demons falling through, only to cancel her effects and let the earth snap back into place, trapping swaths of them in one fell swoop and moving on to different sections of the field to cast that same attack, drowning droves of them in the dirt beneath their feet. "You managing okay?" he asked her, neither of them looking away from the demons below as they carried out their attacks. "For now. It's going to be a long day. Ain't that the truth?" With the heightened awareness that came with his high level of unnatural mind, he was able to take in more on the peripheries of his vision, letting him notice the occasional strikes that had to be coming from the few other awakened mages working in different locations on the field as everyone put their all into their attacks, like trying to drain the ocean with a bucket. As he watched more and more demons come out of their strange gate, his feelings of impending defeat started to swell again. He didn't know how the gods were managing to hold on to any hope for the future, but seeing not a single gap in the wave to suggest any limit or break in what was to come left him trying to guess how many had already gotten past them, finding the number to be uncountable. Hell, just trying to estimate the number getting through the gate each second. Wait, what's going on there? Not a break in the wave so much as it was demons making way in the oncoming swarm. A new one came through the gate, looking no different from any other but still scratching at Ben's mind as it looked around, not rushing out like the rest but instead simply observing, with those coming through after it doing everything they could to give the creature every bit of space they could manage, pressing into each other all of the tighter to avoid touching it. "But why do I recognize it?" Ben asked himself, the answer coming fractions of a second later as his mind made connections and his blood ran cold. From Craftsman's Tower. That demon was the same one who'd stepped out of the gate briefly during the first wave, appearing to destroy Ibaru's weapon and disappearing as soon as its task was done, with its presence filling Ben's mind with questions. Why is it here and what's it going to do? With how it moved the first time, I'd assumed it had come specifically to destroy that thing given how much damage it was doing to the demons, but was that not the case? Do they have some sort of observer class among them that just happens to pop through? That would explain the one that got trapped here when the gates closed early, but then is it going to do anything now? Things definitely aren't going well enough for us for it to step in if it really only did that last time given how much damage we were doing to them, but I don't really want to assume we'll get to enjoy that level of luck. Given the unknown risks, Ben acted to ease his worries the best he could, quickly pulling his partner into his mind and boosting the speeds of both of their thoughts to the maximum. "Thera, major problem." "What?" "The demon that broke the weapon at Craftsman's Tower is here, currently doing nothing but no way to know if it's going to stay that way. She instantly remembered it, how it had thrown out earth and stone in an overwhelming attack she couldn't even touch by incorporating the effects of magic nullification into it, leaving her magic powerless in the face of it as she was forced to wonder how badly things were about to go. Stolen novel. Please report. Okay, so what are we doing then? Any chance of a sneak attack? No clue. The gods have all been pretty firm that the elite demons should only be doing anything during the third wave. For all we know, this is just acting as an observer. If we do nothing, it just might watch a bit and then leave. I don't think either of us are that optimistic. Generally not, but the fact it hasn't attacked immediately is a plus. By the time I grabbed you, it was only looking around, and attacking it might be the prompt that gets it to take action. But if it's not prepared, then we might be able to catch it by surprise, Thera pointed out. Even if it doesn't do anything now, someone's presumably going to have to deal with it in the third wave. It's not something we should just leave and hope it goes away. It was a fair point. Even if it was something that could be avoided, that was a matter of then, not forever. The third wave would come and plenty of powerful threats would come with it. Even killing one more when they had the chance might make a bit of difference down the line, leaving him to give in to her opinion. Okay. If you want, then I'll point it out. He briefly scanned her memories, taking in where she was looking before he'd pulled her into his thoughts as he projected what she'd seen into his mind for both to look at, adjusting the scene from there to show everything he'd witnessed to give a broader idea of the battlefield as a whole, letting her see where she'd need to look when he'd release her mind before letting her go as her eyes scanned the crowd. There, she muttered the second her sight locked onto the distant target while she started preparing a spell, trying to determine what would work best against a creature like that as she decided on pure, overwhelming power before she prepared to lift a small mountain of stone to throw out with as much mana behind the act as she could in the hopes that it both wouldn't be able to react fast enough to use its magic, and failing that, not have the mana or skill for it to make a difference. But as she started casting that, staring at it the entire time, its eyes stopped surveying the battlefield, instead locking onto a target in turn. Them. Before Thera even had a chance to shoot off her massive spell, the creature was already moving, stone wrapping around its feet, as it jumped forward under the power of its strength and mana, and shot itself forward with its earth magic, blasting right to them in a snap. Just as fast, Thera tried to readjust her attack, firing what she had, only to watch as it was swatted away, her strength losing to its control as it reached forward, not sparing her a glance to instead grab Ben by the throat. Found you. Not good. He didn't want to know what it could have possibly meant by that and did his best to make sure he wouldn't get the chance. Despite being lifted by his neck, his throat wasn't being crushed under the powerful grip that had him, so no matter how much it hurt, he focused on how he might escape instead, reaching to his belt where his knife sat first to try and swipe at the monster, only for that to fail spectacularly as the very blade he'd forged with care dissolved when he tried to stab it. Yeah, magic nullification and earth magic both likely awakened. Should have seen this coming. That meant the items on him were going to be useless, but as he prepared his next attack, Thera took action. It didn't matter how powerful or skilled the monster may have been. There was no way that they shared the same limit to their mana, and that was what she aimed to exploit as she wrapped the fortress wall around the creature, filling it with her power to an extent she hoped would overpower whatever it would need to do to cancel her effect, and was rewarded for her effort as she watched it struggle, with the other mages around them seeing what was going on and contributing to her attack, with fire and dark both being shot out at its exposed face and being cancelled immediately due to the difference in skill. But through all of that, it never once let go of Ben, holding on to him while doing everything it could to fight against the crushing force on it as he contributed his own attack, materializing wood to shoot into the arm holding him at all angles, watching as it broke the skin but not getting much farther. Tough bastard, just gotta keep at it. With his idea for doing exactly that being to materialize more wood, not in the form of bullets to be shot but instead a circular saw, strengthened under his magic and spinning to cut through the tough flesh, wanting to separate the arm from the rest of the body to free him from the beast's grasp as it struggled before staging a counterattack of its own. The entire time, its eyes had been locked onto Ben, its focus devoted to him for reasons he couldn't understand, but with how it had been trapped it had no choice but to acknowledge Thera, seeing a genuine threat that it moved to deal with. Without showing any signs to give it away, all at once it lessened the power going toward keeping it from being crushed, taking the injuries that came with it to tear away the floor beneath her, firing it back and filling it with both of its powers in a way she couldn't react to fast enough. Her body smacking against a back wall of the fortress with a sickening thud and ending her attempts to free Ben. He wanted to scream out, but with the grip on his throat, he couldn't even get enough out to speak, instead trying to focus on what mattered. He could still feel the effects of bind between them, which meant she was alive, but with no one else powerful enough to help him nearby, the demon had freed itself an instant later, neither killing him nor releasing him but instead jumping back from where it had come. Oh shit.
Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
Is this fucker trying to go back through the gate? Why? Okay, not important right now. My other attacks weren't enough, which means I need to do what I can with my very limited options, and of them there's really only one that might work, even if there could be some consequences. Not to mention what I'm going to have to survive if I escape. They were already far enough from the fortress that if the demon dropped him then and there, he'd be falling a couple stories to land right in the center of that mad horde, but that was something he could deal with when it happened. For the time being he took a risk, knowing he might damage his very soul as he reached out to the monster with Connect and felt it link, only to go through the added horror that came from being able to see the creature's skills. 3 awakened ones, with low soul magic being 1 at the Zeroth level, but that wasn't unexpected. It was the innate magic of the demon race, and even if they only needed the 7th level to reach sapience, it seemed obvious that something as powerful as that might have managed to get it higher. No, what really gripped him was what else he was seeing. Despite having had to do the majority of its growth without the benefits of the system to strengthen it, both of its other awakened skills, High Earth Magic and Magic Canceling, were each at the 9th level. The monster that held him was a contender to become a god for 2 completely different paths to power. Extra not good. Okay, time to risk it all. With the connection up, he both exposed the full weight of his mind to it, while at the same time ripped as much mana from the monster he could, tearing away a flood and overfilling his soul, all to inflict the damage he could in the hopes of either killing it or leaving it in a state of mana exhaustion, with neither attack working. The thing didn't damage his soul like the mindless one had managed in the past, but it easily broke the connection, and with it, took away his final option. Not even glancing at him despite what Ben had just put him through, the monster simply carried on, bringing him through the gate to whatever waited beyond.